Sadnam, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. And as usual, we're going to start with the chant, the attunement, Adgare Name. So will everybody please put your hands together? Adgare Name, Chigadgare Name, Satgare Name, Siri Gurdeve Name. Adgare Name, Chigadgare Name, Satgare Name, Siri Gurdeve Name. Adgare Name, Chigadgare Name, Satgare Name, Siri Gurdeve Name. My Guru. Wow. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to give a couple of updates. A lot of folks were missing Krishna Kaur yesterday and Guru Singh, and I just happened to notice I had an old voicemail from Krishna, a few days old, and out of courtesy, I replied to that. I called her last night, and she expressed her great regret that she couldn't join us. She said she told me this before. Her mama told her, you know, when she gives her word, she has to keep her word, and because of the lawyers, she couldn't keep her word, and she felt badly about that. But she said she's very much with us in spirit, and she wants to stay in touch. I'm thinking maybe we can do a webinar down the road, just have some very clear guidelines about what she can speak on and what she can't. I don't think the lawyers will have a problem with that. So she sends us really her regards. And we are recording every day. And on Friday, there were no difficulties with people accessing the recording. But yesterday they were. And I got a bunch of feedback. I contacted Zoom, the technical people there, and I think we fixed it. So if you want to chat, text me that you still cannot access that recording, let me know and we'll fix that. And hopefully it's just all fixed, and tonight when we send out the link, it will not be an issue. So that's all the technical stuff, really. So I'll introduce you. We have our distinguished presenters. We have Aftab Singh from Trinidad. We have Nam Kaur, presently in California, I think. Nam Prakash Kaur in York, which is in England. And I'm here in Toronto. And we're going to go alphabetically. So Aftab Singh, please introduce yourself.
Yes, Satnam, everyone. I am Aftab. You will find me on Facebook as Yogi Aftab. And I started way back in 1972. I won't go through my story of how I got there, but basically I've been pretty much teaching for all those years, and I consider myself to be one of the most devoted students of Yogi Ji.
Hi,
You're on mute, Namkar.
Sorry, unmuted now. I started also taking yoga in 1973 and moved into an ashram about 6 months later. I presently live in California and knew Yogi Bhajan very well for about 30 years, working with him and going to hundreds of his classes, tantrics, gurdwaras, eating with him in his living room, traveling with him. So I have a lot of stories and incredible memories.
And I'm Nam Prakash Kaur, and I'm a real newbie compared to these beautiful souls with me today. I only found Kundalini Yoga quite a few years after Yogi Ji passed in 2008. But I did my teacher training in 2009, about 3 months later. So, yeah, it's made such a big difference to my life. I have 4 sons who are home educated, and so right in the middle of home educating them, I found Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan, and yes, it's really changed their lives as well, I think. In fact, my second son has become a level 1 teacher, and so he's teaching now as well. So we're beginning to have more and more of a yogic household here in Yorkshire. As well as doing teaching Kundalini Yoga, I'm also a Gestalt psychotherapist. So I'd like to bring some of the perspective of a psychotherapist to the topics today that we're going to discuss. Thank you. Satnam.
Satnam, thank you all. I'm Guru Fatha Singh. Year-wise, I came to Kundalini Yoga in 1972. I first met Yogi at Cornell University at interfaith panel there, and life goes on. We wrote every month, and then he gave me the job to write his biography, and it's available. Still collecting stories. Anybody has stories? I'm listening. I heard some stories yesterday. I'm going to go in. So having a bit of an overview of Yogi's life, having researched it and listened to so many lectures, not having as much one-on-one experience as Nam Kaur or Livtar Singh, who lived closer. I'm in Canada, but having had access to a really good archive here, and met Yogi a few times. I have an overview from writing the biography of the things he did, which are many. We were saying yesterday that, if you did a couple of those things, you'd be in Wikipedia, just two, and he did dozens and dozens of really amazing things. And so I'm going to start going through the list, and I'm going to encourage my distinguished panelists to turn off your mute and give a holler if there's something you want to say about any of these things. We've got about 3 hours we can go to. So there's lots of time for anybody and everybody to make their contributions. We're going to start off with just some really sort of packaged things that are pretty much, we take for granted. And we'll finish with some unfinished business, some projects that Yogi gave us, some things we need to still work on. But the first one is obviously that Yogi contributed to a global awareness of yoga. And I remember in '72 when I lived in our yoga center, I still remember that phone call. I tell my students about it. Somebody called and said, "Do we bring a spoon to class?" Because there were great things coming from the East, There was yoga and there was yogurt from Bulgaria. And so people got them mixed up, so that recognition wasn't there that we just take for granted now. But back then it was a very mysterious phenomenon. And so no, don't bring a spoon, it's something a little different. They're both healthy. You can eat your yogurt, but not during yoga class. So anyway, and you can study if you want to do research. You can study the progression, the growth in the popularity of yoga. It got a big boost. I mean, one of Yogi's friends was Swami Satchidananda, and he had a couple of disciples, students who were doctors, medical doctors, and they did some serious research on the effects of a yogic lifestyle, vegetarian food, meditation on particularly people with heart issues, right? Cardiovascular, we call it. And they published a paper, I think about 1990 or so, and it was a scientific paper. This is science now. I mean, a lot of things we were doing as well. Yogi said, tradition says, Guru Granth Sahib says, but doesn't carry weight really in our Western critical culture. So now we had actually a scientific study with data, and who picked up on it? The insurance companies picked up on it in the US. And they said, if you actually do this program, we're going to cut your premium that you have to pay us, which was huge. So there was a big upswing in credibility and understanding of the importance and the significance of how what yoga can do for you just at that time. And after that, it really started to take on, started to take up. And I remember in the early 90s, my God, so few yoga classes. From the 70s, we were just hanging on, with odd yoga classes here. We'd have an ashram with a few people, and not everybody would have a yoga class to teach because not everybody wanted to learn yoga. And so that was a big uptake in yoga when it built that scientific credibility when the insurance companies started to buy into it. And then yoga really started to take off. even interestingly, I mean, I've been in India and I've been tempted to stay, but I know that East follows West these days. You know, I mean, we love our Eastern philosophy, but people in India and China and a lot of places, they're very attuned to the trends, what's going on in the West. And America is the trendsetter. And so it's interesting, once America and West started to pick up on yoga, now it's also become a big thing in India. Again, there's a Swami Rama, who's a big star in India and has been for a few years now. But that wasn't possible until Indians started to rediscover their tradition, saying, wow, those people are looking at our tradition. They're valuing it. And we think they're so cool. You know, there must be something to it. So, so that's huge. And it's, you know, it's an amazing time to live in, to go from a time when something that you value, most people didn't know how to spell it, till it becomes so mainstream. It's part of what being a pioneer is. You're out there and you're doing what you love. People don't know what the heck you're about, but you just stick with it. That's what pioneers do. And so we all, and Prakash, you're a pioneer too. You know, even in the time since you started to now, yoga is still gaining, you know, credibility. There's still people don't want to do yoga.
Well, particularly in the area I live, Guru Fatha Singh, I live in a little rural market town, sort of, well, I actually live in a village 5 miles away from the nearest market town, and Yorkshire people are, I would say, mostly still back in the 1950s in terms of the culture around here. Certainly within my family culture, it was like that, you know. 10 years down the line from having deed polled my name change, I still maybe have 1% of people around me calling me by my Sikh name now.
Well, you got the 1%.
Which is great progress.
Why good? And we have pioneers. I think we still, I'm not sure, but maybe we've got Juma on the webinar. He was with us the last couple of days. You know, he's in Rwanda and Burundi. And my God, you know, definitely there, that's a frontier. That's a frontier. We got somebody was participating yesterday from, I think it was Mauritania. I mean, there are places out there where people are still getting it. And some people say it's very big in China, but that is a big country. You know, I think it's big in some parts of China, but certainly not everywhere. So yeah, and we're a part of that. So Yogiji, he was a Sikh, and he inhabited this unique domain between Sikh Dharma, which he's a very avid Sikh, very inspired Sikh, and of Kundalini Yoga, very accomplished yogi. So he was inhabiting that space there, and in doing so, he also raised the profile of Sikh Dharma. I mean, he helped it to gain recognition, world recognition. I mean, there are still groups, the Jains, if you've heard of the Jains, you can Google it, Jain. There's maybe about 10 million of them. There are the folks, we call them Parsis, or also known as Zoroastrians, another small minority. And they pretty much intermarry and just keep within themselves. And Sikhs were not that different. You know, when Yogiji came to the West, Sikhs kept to themselves, kept their head down, didn't bother anybody. We don't proselytize, you know. But Yogiji gave the Sikh Dharma a profile. He came out there. He went out and, you know, when he had just a very few followers, he went and sought out the Pope. He went to Rome. He went to see number one. And he introduced himself. And that was, you know, and I met him at the Cornell University Interfaith Forum. You know, he became the face of Sikh Dharma. And the fact that he could actually convey Guru Nanak's essential teachings to non-Punjabis really struck a chord. People started to sit up and take notice, both within the Sikh fold and certainly outside of the Sikh fold. And so that was huge. He made a huge contribution. I'm going to come back to the different aspects of that. Yoga therapy is another area. I mean, yoga is yoga, but many people do it for the personal benefits, the health benefits. You People didn't know about that. People thought, yoga is this thing people do in the forest. They tie themselves in the knots, but what's the therapeutic benefit? Well, now we have people, I have a colleague, I like to plug her whenever I can, Dr. Jindani here, who did a study on Kundalini Yoga with post-traumatic stress disorder. We have David Kaur Khalsa, who's done a number of studies. He's appeared at the American Psychiatric Association conventions. We have Dr. Aftab Singh Khalsa at Harvard now. So these studies are starting to come out, and there's validity. What is it? There's a association, the Association of Yoga Therapists, I think. I think Satir is on the board. I mean, these are all light years removed from 1968 when Yogi Bhajan arrived. So much progress, so much understanding in the West. In India, people knew, you do this kriya, you do that pranayama. Some people knew that, but not here. Not here. Not in York, not in Toronto, not in Trinidad, not in Sacramento. It's a big shift. It's a big shift. Yeah, and what that did also for the Sikhs, the cultural Sikhs, people who were born into a Sikh family, it made them, question themselves. They started to look at the world differently rather than just keeping their head down. They said, "Wow, we're a global religion. We have brothers and sisters who have different colors of skin and speak different languages, and a lot of them can't even speak Punjabi. And still, they read from the Guru Granth Sahib as best they can, and so it made them made them question their own roots. Even Yogiji said that we made him question, what it is to be a Sikh, and he learned from us how to teach Sikh Dharma, how to teach what I call Guru Sikh Yoga. In fact, that's not a term of my own. It's by Guru Das, who was lived in the time of Guru Arjan. He called it Guru Sikh Yogi. That's what somebody who practices this yoga, chants Waheguru, gets up early morning, keeps their hair, a holistic rather than escapist yogi, rather than ascetic. So it made people, Sikhs too, question, what is this? And we helped them out a little bit. It was still a small minority when I came here, came to this in Toronto. And, we did human rights cases. We challenged the authorities. And I remember there's a fellow, Ishur Singh, who was working as a security guard. And they said, no, you can't work as a security guard with a turban on. He did a human rights case. He took them to court. And I did a couple myself. And I was happy to do that. I heard in the States, I was reading the Beads of Truth, our magazine, that there were a couple of guys who were in the army, and they would have weekend leave. And there was one guy in the Navy and one guy in Germany in the army. And they would take Kundalini Yoga class. And they said, wow, we're so high. We want to be Sikhs now. We want to keep our hair. And of course, they go back to the army base and they say, no. And they forcibly cut their hair. And so they got a hold of, Yogiji, and he sent telegram to the SGPC in Amritsar, and he needed to get a telegram because nobody in the West understood. They didn't know who the SGPC was even. And so just stating that indeed Sikhs do keep their hair, and it's a legitimate religion. And so Yogiji took that and got them their rights. So they were the first Sikhs in the American Armed Forces. And hearing about that, I said, well, actually, the head of my ashram, he challenged me one day. He said, so-and-so was the planner, was behind, he was our contractor. He says, we had a big job renovating our ashram. Some of you who've been in Toronto, you may have seen it. It's a beautiful place. About 77, we did that. He said, well, Ram Singh is a contractor. He did a great thing, memorable thing. What can you do? So I thought, and I said, well, let's try this army thing. And so I did, and I applied to join the Royal Scottish Regiment, I think it was, here in Toronto. And they said, you can't join us, because you got a beard and you got a turban. And so I said, no problem. So I applied. And there were no human rights commissions. We're just a little ahead of that curve. But I wrote the Prime Minister, and I wrote we have a kind of a socialist party here. I wrote the member of that party. And this poor guy, the NDP guy, said, how much we can do, the rules are the rules. Got a nice letter back from the Minister of Defense. The Secretary of the Prime Minister wrote that. But within a few months, they actually started a Human Rights Commission. And I was one of the first cases. And I wasn't able to see it through because I was also just starting university as a mature student. I dropped out after grade 10, but I was starting university again. And so I was too busy. But I passed it on to somebody in my community, Kaur Singh, and he carried it through. And my gosh, on Baisakhi, a couple of years later, the local MP brought a turban, you know, for the big Baisakhi Mela, brought it to the Gurdwara and gave the guy a turban. And so we were in. And now, and I don't know if you know this, but in Toronto, the Minister of Defense in Canada is a Sikh with a turban, you know? So I feel very humbled. We're just in the right place at the right time. It's just luck. But we've changed the world. We really have changed the world. And some places are a little further removed. In Canada too, we have some places. I've been in Regina. You know, Regina is kind of like York. You know, it's way, a little still in the 50s. But, you know, slowly the populace, everybody starts to follow the trends in the urban centers. And so that's huge. You know, it affected us. We didn't know how to spell Sikh. And it affected the Sikhs at that time too. Some didn't like us very much because they, you know, Yogiji was pointing us out and saying to them, look, if those guys can keep their turbans, what's the matter with you? You know, you've been wearing turbans for generations. Some of them really disliked us about that. But mostly, they were a little shy, but mostly were very welcoming and appreciate what we're doing. And many times we ended up teaching their children, teaching them, we are the Khalsa, mighty, mighty Khalsa, everywhere. And they loved it. You know, the children loved it, and the parents loved it. I even did I was invited once to do a whole program for Sikh youngsters. And at the high point, we had about almost 300 youngsters coming. And, you know, there were grandparents couldn't speak a word of English. But even though our medium was English, the grandparents were making it known that they appreciated you were passing that tradition on to their children. And so it's huge because they knew that, you know, this is a wasteland, really. You know, it's so easy to get sucked into McDonald's and, you know, all the MTV and all the distractions and totally lose your tradition. And so there's things we haven't figured out. Most of us are pretty mute, you know, but we can't speak Punjabi for the life of us. But still, you know, there are some things that we can contribute, and certainly I mean, if you want to learn about hospitality, go visit a Punjabi household, and they'll show you a thing or two. Prakash, have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in with a story that of my son and I visiting the Notting Hill Festival in London a couple of years ago.
What's a Notting Hill Festival?
The Notting Hill Festival is a big carnival. It's particularly in West London, in an area that's particularly people of colour, a lot of Punjabi people living in that area, a lot of black people living in that area, and they come out and they have their floats with all their streamers and different aspects of their culture, singing, bands and dancing and this sort of thing. Everyone from London turns up into these few little streets around just near Kensington. So you might have heard of the Grenfell Tower fire. That was Grenfell is right in the heart of Notting Hill. That's the area I'm talking about.
It's public housing. There was a big fire in public housing, a high rise.
Yeah, that's right, high-rise building that wasn't suitable for purpose. The fire cladding was insufficient. So this is it's kind of it's right next door to Kensington, which is very wealthy area. You've got Harrods and all these sort of stores there, and then there's Notting Hill just round the corner, and it's like going into another world, similar to going from the Golden Temple where they've done all the courtyard at Amritsar, and then you walk into the back streets, and it's like going into a different area. And so I had my heart set on visiting my son in London and going to the Notting Hill Carnival, and he was saying, "Mum, no, you really don't want to go, you know, it's not the place for you." I was like, anywhere is the place for me, come on, let's go. And so my two sons and my son's girlfriend and I ended up walking through these streets, and I did realize what they were saying straight away. Very heavy drinking, you know, lots of very lewd behavior, you know, dancing after a few hours turns to more like strip joint kind of. So we were walking through all of this, the drug taking, there were files of different things lying on the floor, you know, empty capsules of, and dressed in bana and our turbans on, totally sober, chanting Satnam silently. Satnam, 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 where are we? But we had several groups of young Sikh men in particular throw themselves at us in tears, saying that we had, they felt such shame about their drinking, they felt shame about wearing the turban and drinking. And I was saying that, you know, we are actually very gifted here because we have chosen this. We weren't made to do it from birth. We weren't given it as a we should do this. We've chosen it, and therefore it's easier for us. You know, so you guys, you have to kind of be able to reject it in order to accept it for yourselves. But it was very, very powerful, particularly for my son. He was 19 at the time, and so a lot of the young men his age, the Punjabi Sikhs, who were really affected by seeing him and the way he was really keeping up, you know.
Waheguru. Yeah, there's so many connections. You know, I'll just build on that a bit because Yogiji encouraged that. He encouraged us. I think 75 was the last time he really encouraged us to learn Punjabi. His wife even put together a primer for learning Punjabi, but he you know, he didn't want to beat a dead horse, so he was going to keep pushing that. But that, you know, it's a matter of record, and I see that over and over. You know, the linkage. I told the story, I think, on Friday. I'll tell you another story. I'm working. Typically, I teach for the City of Toronto. Their classes through the Department of Parks and Recreation are very affordable, so I teach through there. But all those classes are shut. So I've been redeployed working in a homeless shelter for men. And so that's what I've been doing the last few weeks. And this is my last week in one of the shelters. Actually, on one day, some interesting things happened from two different people. So there's no turbans there except for me. But there's quite a few, let's say out of 62, maybe 4 or 5 of the men are registered. You recognize they have Punjabi names, they have Sikh names. And they're there without their hair and they're on hard times. One of the guys is really trying to turn himself around. He's working crazy shifts. He said, well, I'm not going to be in tonight, la, 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 la. But on the last time I saw him, he seemed kind of beside himself, a little stressed out, and came and went. And then he finally brought himself to speak with me. And you know what he did? Like, this is basically a homeless man working like really hard. He gave me $100. And he said, please give this to your Gurdwara. Now, he didn't know. I tried to tell him that I don't really go to Gurdwaras much. I've lived in Gurdwaras, but I tried to refuse, but I could see that wasn't the thing to do. So I'll put it towards some publications, some worthy work. But my God, the ordinary person doesn't give you $100 like that. That's, he felt that connection, and it's some shame, And the other situation, one of the security guards was also a shaven Sikh, right? And he said he'd never seen anybody like me before. And I, told him my website and spending time on the website, and again, he was just overcome. How come? Because he's, people get into this mode, this inferiority mode, that they've got this minority religion, nobody cares about it, they should Westernize and pick up Western values and forget about Punjabi. And I was speaking to him in Punjabi, which really got him going. And so, yeah, we have a connection there. In fact, during this COVID crisis, I've received 2 phone calls from students of mine offering me financial help to carry me through the crisis because they knew there were no classes. And they're both Punjabis, right? Yeah. In fact, one is a Hindu married to a Sikh woman, whatever. They're students of mine, right? Their families are students of mine. And so I'm just telling you, by not tapping into the Punjabi community in a selfless way. I'm not saying doing it for self-interest because all the money they have. No. But if you can do it in a humble way, and please learn a few words of Punjabi, doors will open. You didn't even know there were doors there. So I think our potential is hugely, hugely inhibited by what I call our, our subtle racism, the boundaries we draw around ourselves. We don't have any idea what our potential is. And Yogi wasn't going to beat us over the head about it. But that's part of the picture too. And I think part of it that blows a lot of people's minds, East and West, is that we define, as Guru Gobind Singh defined, Sikh Dharma, not as this package of rituals and you must. Because it's funny, because this children from the Punjabi families, if they want to rebel, they get their hair cut. You know, people like Aftab, I don't know, like myself, certainly, you know, when I was growing my hair, I was in trouble because, you know, they wanted me to look respectable. So we're defining it not by as a system of conformity, heaven help us, you know, but as a system of being very original, being in ourself, being our satnam, being authentic, and you know, and as a lifestyle. And if you're not doing it, as Guru Gobind Singh said, you know, Ret pyare mujhko, Sikh pyare nahi. You know, I love people's sadhana. I love people, their discipline. I love when they're doing discipline when it's easy not to be doing discipline. That's what I love. I don't care. They just call me their teacher, their guru, and they say they're my Sikh. I don't care. That doesn't count for anything. So, and that's our routine. We're not about rituals. We're not, all right, we're not even about the culture, really. Though we like saag, you know, maki roti and saag and all that stuff. We're really, you know, we're about discipline. We're about the science. That's what we're about. New kind of Sikh. Then another part of Yogiji's legacy is, you know, the countless people. I was telling yesterday, I don't know if you heard his tale, but, you know, I'll just share it for those of you who didn't hear it. So they were coming, with Siri Singh Saab and his secretary were coming from the Caribbean to winter solstice in Orlando. And along the way, they stopped in the airport in Miami. And Yogiji just sat down somewhere, and people started to come to him. You know, some people maybe recognized him, some people were just curious. And he held court there. And every hour there's going to be a plane. And so staff would say, Vipra would say, well, there's another plane at 4. We can just catch that plane. And Yogiji would just wave them off. There's another plane just coming. If we can catch the 5 o'clock plane, wave them off. 6 o'clock plane. You know, he was there till the last plane at 11 o'clock, just holding court. You know, all healing people's hearts. And, you know, Yogiji counseled countless people. And so that's part of his legacy too. And some people may not remember his name, but he's touched so many hearts. Namkar?
That's what I saw him do wherever he was. Whether he was in the hospital, then he would be turning the nurses and the doctors into his patients. Whether he was on an airplane, he would be teaching the person next to him, oh, you have a headache, here's what to do. Everywhere he went, he was teaching, he was inspiring, and he was tuning into what the people around him needed. It was such a gift to watch. And it was also amazing to see how different he was with each student. Some people he would be very sweet and smiling to. Some people he would be a little more professional or business-like with. Some people he might yell at to get his message through. Some people he would feed in order to make them feel cozy. I mean, he just had such a way about him of seeing into each person's soul, but understanding the psyche of that person and how he needed to address them to get through to their soul. It was really amazing to see.
Waheguru. And he set us a standard to be 10 times greater than him. I mean, that's quite a standard. Liptar Singh mentioned how, you know, they were in the Caribbean, and typical routine is you get in your hotel and you cocoon and you make yourself comfortable. They would barely drop their luggage, and he'd be looking for people that needed him. He was just looking for trouble, really, looking for challenges, looking for places where he can expend his gift, his energy. and that was what he did.
You mentioned Miami, and Liftar mentioned some of the things in Trinidad yesterday. And you know, when I met Yogi Ji and I wanted him to come to Trinidad, and I met him at Solstice, and I said, "Sir, I would like you to come to Trinidad and teach." And he said to me, "Sure, you know, get 100 students together, and I'll be there." At that time, I had like maybe 12 students. But I remember him saying, could be talking about his global influence. I remember him saying that people were saying he was sick, and the doctors were saying he shouldn't travel, he shouldn't go to these places because the traveling was making him more and more sick. And they said, "Well, why you keep doing it? You're sick." And the doctors say you shouldn't do it. And he said, "You know, I have to go because they cannot come to me." So he had to go to these places and teach. So he came to Trinidad eventually, and it was the best experience I had. And I felt very honored to have him. And if I were to think in my life, what is the greatest achievement spiritually I've done, is, I would say, is having him come to Trinidad and to meet these students. And we had like maybe a couple hundred students at the time when he came. And he demonstrated to me and to the students how humble he can be. I mean, we took him to meet the president, to the mayor, and the MPs and stuff like that. And he's used to that. Like you said, he met the Pope, he would meet presidents in different countries. But he also met people who didn't know him at all. People who he would just meet once, like Namka is saying. He would meet people who he would just touch, and he would just relate to them for a short time and give them something. And I remember once we went to this place, it's called the Gandhi Ashram, which is supposed to be like the highest ashram in Trinidad, the Hindu ashram, where all the elite Hindu people go to, and they associate. It's like a club. It's a big Hindu club, you know. So he went there. He spoke there for a while, and it was pretty late at night. It was like maybe 11 o'clock when he finished. And then the president said, "Would you like to come to the house and have something to eat, because you have all these dignitaries there waiting to meet you?" And so he went there and he stayed for a while, about half an hour. He ate some things or whatever. I wasn't in the room because I was in charge of the security and driving. And when he was leaving there, late at night, there was a group of people around the car. I didn't know who they were. And I'm concerned because at that time, there was some tension with the Sikhs in India and the Hindus. And I'm a little bit suspicious of these guys. And he came out and he said, "What are these guys? Who are these guys? What do they want?" I said, "So they're, don't worry about them. They're just guys. They want you to come to their place." I don't know who they are. I don't know where they're from. I don't know what their agenda is. I don't know anything about them. And it's not on the schedule, so I don't think we should go. He says, chalo, let's go. You know? So we went, and we went to this place, and these guys were driving really fast and bumpy roads, potholes in the backward area, which I've never been to. And I'm kind of a little scared because I'm thinking, well, I'd hate for something to happen to him while I am there, right? And he goes to this house, and everybody's chanting. I'm not sure if you know what a dal tak is. It's a long piece of metal, which the Indians beat. And they go to this house. It's a mud house, and it's just a really simple, humble place. And he sits on the ground in the mud house, which is usually made of cow dung and mud mixed together. It's a little thing. And all they have is this dantal, this metal thing, and a dolok, a drum. They don't have any harmoniums, no sitars, no nothing. But they're chanting, and they're chanting so vigorously, jai, 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 something or the other, you know. And he sat and he listened to them for a while. They did some arati for him, you know, they give this this what do you call this little dish that they have with flowers and things. And he cried. And later on he said, in my life, I don't cry much. And these guys that touched my heart so much that I cried. You know, he said, I cried when my mother died. I cried when Carl Tuckett had this problem. And this is another time he cried. But it showed me that we don't understand a lot of things about how he teaches and the way it goes. So he would go to the most remote place which I would consider insecure, and not knowing anyone at all, not knowing what the people's agendas are. And he would go there, and he'd also go to the palaces, and he'd also go to the president's house. And he would go to every country because he knew that he had to go to these places to teach people. And this is just like one of the amazing stories and amazing experiences I had with him. I have lots and lots of stories I can tell you just about Trinidad, but this one to really touch my heart and to see how humble he can be in his teaching.
Waheguru. You shared that in a few other stories. Did you want to say some more?
But I don't want to keep up the whole day with the stories. I mean, I can talk on stories for the whole day, you know.
Another.
I'm sure we all do. We all have lots and lots of stories.
Okay, that's good for now. That's good for now. Thank you. I mean, that story you did tell me, and I did stick it in the book, and a few other stories. So they're in the biography. But
right.
If we have time, we'll come back. All right?
Sure.
Namkar too. Namkar has a bunch of stories. I can see.
I'm sure, yeah. Because you know, we've been there for a while, so we probably have a lot of stories we can tell.
I'd like to add another way in which he is so genuinely thought of everyone and thought of our generations and the future of our planet. And that was the way he handled white tantric yoga. Because he told us there could only be one Mahan Tantric on the planet at a time, and that the mantle was passed. When the Mahan Tantric died, it would pass to the next Mahan Tantric. And so after he had a serious heart problem, and he started recording the Tantric courses, and they were taught on video, he was still able to lead the tantric with his subtle body. The facilitator would be there, but he was still leading the tantric courses through the video. And my husband was his physician for the last 8 years or so of his life. And he said that when there was a tantric weekend, a day or two before the tantric started, he would see Yogi Ji's health go down. His vital signs would change. There was a noticeable difference in how he had to put forth that tantric energy, and it would affect his health adversely. And then it would continue for a couple of days after the tantric, which meant that there was only a window of a few days in the middle of the week where he could regain his health and regain his energy before the next tantric course started, because he taught them almost every weekend for a good part of the year. And when his health was really declining in the last few years, a lot of his staff and family were very concerned. And there were a couple of times where they asked him to stop doing the tantric so he could extend his life and be with us longer. And each time they did, he adamantly refused to stop, didn't really give an explanation, but was just adamant that he was going to carry on teaching tantric. And of course, my husband was also very concerned, being his doctor. And we were discussing it one day when I realized he isn't going to stop teaching these tantrics. He needs to keep teaching them until he dies, so his subtle body can continue. And that's exactly what he did. He set it up that way with the recordings so they could still be taught now for all of us and for new students. And he could still be directing that, because he told us that once he passed, he could do more for us spiritually than he could in his physical body. And I think one of the big ways he does that for us is through continuing the White Tantric. The other way he does it is coming to you in a dream. And a lot of new students have told me that they've had dreams with him, which makes me really happy, because I used to wonder, how will new people feel the same master's touch that we felt with him in physical form? You know, how will they have that same kind of experience and realize what it is to have a spiritual teacher, aside from having the Kundalini Yoga, aside from having White Tantric, just having an example of someone who is selfless and serviceful and masterful in so many realms. And so it's really exciting to me that he's continuing to meet and greet new students, whether it's in a meditation, touching them through the Tantric, or going to them in a dream to give them his message. Satnam.
Waheguru. So the work goes on. So one of the really important areas Yogi touched, because he could, he could see our deficiencies, he could see our needs. There's a whole gender that had specific needs, and I think somebody, my teacher in Toronto, Prakash Kaur, used to call the biggest oppressed minority on the planet, which is womankind. And so he addressed that headlong. I mean, here we have one son of God. That's our basic religion here. One son of God, never married, and didn't have a dad really. And that's our role model. Whereas in India, every god has a goddess, and typically, if you want to get to the god, you go through the goddess. It's a very different kind of a routine. And in the Sikh prayer, we start off Pritam Bhagavati Simaraka. You pray to basically to the goddess first off before you even touch Guru Nanak. And so he started what we call the Grace of God movement. You can read about it. I'm not going to explain the whole thing. But basically, the concept is that woman is our first teacher. Woman is our first love. Woman is vastly underappreciated and vastly undersupported. As a culture, we can find technical ways of not having women. We can figure out ways to make embryos in laboratories or in factories. We can have sex dolls that talk to us. We can have a lot of stuff. But I think all that stuff takes away from our humanity, all that stuff. And Yogi, you could see the trajectory we were going for. And he devoted a lot of time to womankind. He created the women's camp. So it was huge. Some of the fundamental teachings he gave us were the idea of a 40-day. And I researched this. It's not so weird. It's not even an original idea that after a birth, a mother, it's really good for her, it's good for the child, it's good for everybody to stay at home and be looked after. Before industrialization, my impression is that's what just about everybody did. I've seen in Philippines they did it, in China, I've had students from Poland, they told me they used to do it. In Africa, there's examples all over the place. This is what people did, rather than, in the US, I think you have, for a long time, I don't know if it's changed, like 2 weeks maternity leave and then back to the factory, So Yogi said, you're not meant for that. You have, it's a very important thing, creating human beings. You're able to make computers, very expensive computers when you go back to the factory and that's your job, or you may make designs for skyscrapers, but creating a human being, that's something priceless. And you need to devote some time to that, for heaven's sake. So, he encouraged us in that. And when our son came, we hired a good friend. And that's what we did. And moreover, he took, again, if you dig into it, this is not original, but if you dig into old Indian tradition, there are traditions of celebrating the arrival of a soul before the birth. And so we, retold that story and reincorporated that and brought it into our lifestyle to celebrate, the arrival of that soul and to celebrate the institution of motherhood, rather than, the baby shower and it's all baby. Celebrate the mother, celebrate her dignity, her grace, her creativity, her consciousness, her higher consciousness, and celebrate the possible rebirth of the world through that mother's womb. He said, forget about, women never got the Equal Rights Amendment in the States. Never happened. But he said, no, not to worry. If you give birth to a Christ, some Messiah, everything will be better. Everything will be changed. And you have the power to do that. So that's a huge, huge mission. It's a huge, very ambitious undertaking that he did.
Yes, he also created the women's camps. And for 4 to 6 to 8 weeks every summer for many, many years, the women would leave and come to be with Yogi Bhajan and with each other in New Mexico and camp out. And he would teach us very, very strenuous yoga sets in the morning under a big top tent. And during the day, we'd have various classes on topics concerning women and Sikhism and yoga. And then at night, we'd come back after dinner and have a lecture meditation class with him. And the men felt very underappreciated because they had to stay home and work and send the women to camp. But again, that was just part of how he turned the tide. He saw that women, as you say, were underappreciated in our culture and needed time to reflect and be women, find their strength, be in the company of other women, have their peanut hours, all these things, and learn the teachings from the Oriental style of being a woman, the art of being a woman. And so he brought all that to us. And he tried to change the tide by having those camps. And at the same time, once we all started having children, there was the children's camp at Ramdas Puri. So the moms, again, didn't have to have the responsibilities of motherhood during that 6 weeks. They could really focus on their own growth. So that was another wonderful tradition that he brought to us.
Waheguru. Yeah, and connected with that, so there's building women to be all they were born to be a Shakti, to be an empowering force. And then there's the children. God, the lectures, the talks, the harangues he gave us for not bringing up children well. Because he really, as a teacher, the teacher of that caliber, you have great sensitivity for others' pain and their suffering. And he felt that in the women, but he also felt it in the children, even within our families, and he did his best to correct us and help us to bring up great souls, to affirm them in their destiny, to affirm them in their spirituality, to affirm them in their sadhana. And of course, Miri Piri was partly for that. We'll come back to that later. We talked yesterday about Liftar Singh's, up top, go ahead.
No, I was just going on with Namkar here. She did teach a men's course too, Namkar. He didn't leave us out completely.
Because 1 weekend, not 6 weeks.
Right, I know. We complained and complained, enough. He said, okay, we're gonna give you guys just like a little weekend split, little couple hours every weekend he spent with us. And he, of course, I have all his books there, and it was very intense. It's very tightly packaged compared to the ladies, of course. But the information, if any man has not read that man-to-man series or listened to his tapes, you should. It's very, very useful for every man to study. And of course, the ladies camp. I have the first lectures from the first camp was pretty much intense like that too, and then he expanded as he went on. I've noticed in the other ladies' trainings in the other years, but he didn't quite completely leave us out.
No. In fact, he did weekend courses. I've been to a couple of them. I think there were about 6 or 7 that he did over time. But mostly the focus was on the women. He said, if a man falls, so you lose a man. If a woman falls, a whole generation goes. So he was very strategic in where he put his energy. Liftar Singh told yesterday about his marriage. Actually described, I think 3, because he's just had his 49th anniversary. So his was totally arranged out of the blue by Yogiji, with help from his staff. He asked, who's available? Who will be a good match? So he did that many times. Some people like the Gurukus came to Yogiji, they already were in a relationship, but he pressed them, you know, make a commitment to a marriage. And so he did not only arranged marriages, he counseled, he did reconciliations, and God bless us, you know. He would say, you know, marriage is for once, and then still some of his students he would reluctantly grant a divorce, and some would be married. I think the record might be 5 or 6 times. But yeah, so definitely lots of marriage counseling and so on. Aftab, you're not on mute. Did you have something you wanted to say? You just forgot to put the mute.
Oh, okay, I suppose.
Okay. So I'm just running through a list here of legacy items. So another legacy that if you go online, library of theteachings.com, so many lectures there, and so easy to access. And so we're very grateful to KRI and those who have funded KRI and those who worked, you know, put those lectures there. That's a huge legacy for us and for future generations. If you haven't gone there, check it sometime. Somebody was telling me the other day they take hukams from there, you know, just take sort of random readings, and why not? You know, there's a lot of wisdom in it. Also, one of the legacies Yogiji gave us, I mean, look, let's say 68, Yogi Bhajan comes to Toronto. Toronto was a very Caucasian city back then. It was quite insular and a very different city than what it is today. Today, majority of people in Toronto are people of color, all different colors. And I think Yogiji helped make that possible, and all of us did, by making folks more open and more tolerant. And we blew a few people's minds along the way. Not only the Punjabi, you know, youth looking at Prakash Kaur and others of us, but you know, the Caucasians looking and say, what the hell? Because, you know, people like myself and many others could have easily just got by, you know, just blending with the woodwork, blending in the background. But instead, we chose to make ourselves visible minority. Typically, visible minority, hey, that's where all the abuse goes. You're visibly a Jew, or you're visibly Chinese, or whatever it is. Heaven help you if your skin color is different. You can't do much with that. Skin whitener doesn't work so great. But, you know, everybody would like to abuse the minorities. And here we were showing up, all full of ourselves, and just saying, no, bring it on. You want to abuse me for being a Sikh? Call me a Bin Laden, or you want to call me an Ayatollah, call me a Paki. I don't care. You know, I'm going to go back, do my sadhana, regenerate myself, and I'll just renew. You know, you can't hurt me. And that changed. I think that changed our culture a lot. We're very lucky to live in a fairly liberal city with a fairly liberal media here in Toronto. But still, whether you're in Vancouver, which is more conservative, or Trinidad or whatever, I think that just blew a lot of people's minds. You know, your culture isn't necessarily, well, some people took extensions to that. Some would say even your gender isn't necessarily the one you're born into. You know, take it however you want to take it. But we, I think, blew a lot of people's minds and really opened up the culture in our own ways. So another legacy is Yogi Tea. My God, Yogi Tea, Yogi Tea. I mean, it's a big enterprise in Oregon and also in Europe. Employs a lot of people. Beautiful product, and I think they still have sayings of Yogi on it. And we're so grateful. I mean, Yogi Tea is healing, and it's a healthy beverage. There are a few variations of it. We're so grateful for Yogi Tea, and thankfully we still have it. And we did have our crisis. We lost the Golden Temple Bakery, but we didn't lose the Yogi Tea Company. Chardi Kala Jata, you know that group? They do that kirtan. I mean, it's the only Krishna. All right, you give her credit. Krishna Kaur is the first non-Punjabi to sing in the Harimandir Sahib. Somehow, you know, she first non-Punjabi woman to sing. We had a couple of jatas that sang in 79 and 80. Then there was a long break, but the Chardi Kala Jata, they studied under a very accomplished Ragi, and they got really good. She did a couple of teachers. I met one of them. And when they were ready, you know, the SCPC, the management in Amritsar said, go for it. You can sing. And they gave them, you know, an irregular, semi-regular spot in the schedule. And So I mean, Yogaji loved to hear those guys when they were granted, Fatha Singh and Harimandir Sahib. That was before, really modern technology. One of the youngsters, he's a son of Harimandir Jog, son of Guru Bhajan Singh, and he would secretly bring in his phone, and so we'd have a connection. We'd go to Guru Bhajan Singh, and Guru Bhajan Singh would send the live feed to the City Singh stuff, and he loved. Because Yogaji was largely about building bridges, building those cultural bridges, and to see that the children of some of the students were singing in the Harimandir stuff, despite all of their cultural and linguistic and other handicaps, that they actually got there, and people were listening to them and giving them such respect. It was a huge, huge thing, and they're still doing it. So that's a huge thing. Sikhnet.com, the biggest Sikh website. And they're getting a little bit more Punjabi too. I've been pushing Guru saying, get some more Punjabi material. They're getting there. They just had a Punjabi children's story. But still, it's a huge resource. A lot of kirtan on it. You have apps, and sort of very humbly. But it's a huge legacy item. Miri Kiri Academy, after years of sending youngsters from the West to schools other people were running, finally, I think it was 97 that Miri Kiri Academy was established outside of Amritsar. It's a very barren place at the beginning. We're very lucky. Deva Singh, I think his name is, from Florida, came and landscaped it. And today it's just lush and beautiful. I'll talk more about Miri Kiri as a work in progress later, but really that is a legacy that Yogaji passed on to us before his passing physically. Peace and reconciliation in Punjab. Oh my God, those of us who are older remember when the army attacked the Golden Temple. There were years of conflict. And Yogaji told us the background stories. It's fascinating to hear because, as Guru Nanak, he was like kind of a very empowered hippie. It was all peace and love. Peace and love and Nam. Nam means be yourself. Be true to your infinite self, not your emotional self, but be true to that 3-year-old, that playful, universal, loving being. And so Guru Nanak was like that, but eventually we learned the necessity of defending ourselves and defending others. And came a time where Sikhs developed a reputation, the Khalsa Sikhs, the warriors, the Singh warriors, of being a thorn in the side of anybody who wanted to oppress Punjab or to oppress India. So Sikhs gave a hard time, the Khalsa gave a hard time to the Mughals, the Afghans who came in, Baba Deep Singh stood up to them. You can Google Baba Deep Singh if you don't know the story. When the British finally came, oh my God, the Namdaris gave them such grief. And then the SGPs, the people that formed the SGPC, they stood up, and they were, Mahatma Gandhi didn't like Sikhs. He was a Hindu. He didn't understand Sikhs. He called Guru Gobind Singh a misguided patriot. But the people who were best at the non-violent resistance, those were the Sikhs. Those were the Sikh war veterans who put aside their arms, took a vow of non-violence before the Akal Takht, and they went out wherever they needed to go and got beat up or got shot. And and they fought for the freedom of India in that way. And so they're a 2% minority. They were made a lot of promises by the majority Hindus. Even the Muslims in Pakistan said, well, if you join our side, we'll give you da 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 da. But the Sikhs ended up in the Hindu side, Hindu majority side, and there were these promises that were kept, unkept, I should say, made but not kept, like giving them their own province. They had to fight for that. Giving them a reasonable share of the river waters. They were farmers. They needed that. Giving a holy status like Rishikesh got for Amritsar. They were not given that. A lot of unbroken, unfulfilled promises. And so by the early 80s, people started to get impatient. And moreover, as Yogaji explained it, the KGB that means the secret service of the Soviet Union, had their eyes on Russia. And already India was in their orbit. The communist state in Bengal, communist state in the south, in Kerala, and they wanted the whole place communist. And they looked around. They said, well, what's the problem here? And they realized soon the Sikhs were in the way. Sikhs were not going to go communists. And the Sikhs were very fearless about fighting or dying for freedom, dying for human rights. And so they got in with Indira Gandhi. I won't go the whole story with it, but Indira Gandhi bought into their theory. You've got to humble the Sikhs. You've got to beat the Sikhs down, and that's how she's going to get elected. And that's, of course, the Russians, how they'll get, the Soviets, how they'll get dominance in India. And so, the Sikhs were targeted. And there's some very clever media manipulation. There's some very clever politicking, dividing the Sikhs to rule them, to conquer them. And it ended up with, a lot of innocent people being killed. There was a civil war basically went on for years and years. And Yogi, through all of that, he knew people. Indira Gandhi came to his yoga class, for heaven's sake, when he was teaching in New Delhi. And he knew the radicals. I mean, somebody was just telling me, the talks from Sant Bindrawal, he's not different from the talks of Yogi. He's talking about Sikh pride and living and keeping your hair and not taking booze. So there's a commonality there. But Yogi wanted to be in the middle, wanted to make peace. He knew Jnani Zail Singh, who was the vice president, or the president, I should say, of India. And difficult place to be, because when the situation is so polarized and you're in the middle, both sides are going to suspect you. And so to make a long story short, it was horrible. And a lot of people tried to convince Jnani Zail Singh, the president of India, to just quit, just pack it in, because there was so much atrocity done and he was not being kept in the loop about all those atrocities. And he persuaded Jnani, listen, please stay, because if you quit, people are going to say Sikhs, all Sikhs are anti-India. And if you think you've seen pogroms, massacres of Sikhs, you haven't seen anything yet. It's going to get so much worse. So he convinced Jnani Zail Singh to stay in his position, and he continued through the years to try and keep peace. Rumor is that Yogi also funded some of the radicals who were trying to stand up against the Indian government. That's just a rumor, but it's a very difficult place to be in. And finally, in 1995, he came to the World Sikh Conference. We talked yesterday about Aftab Singh's contribution there, sharing the song of the Khalsa. And Yogi, he said to Sikhs from everywhere, because the first world conference that had happened in many years, because the government would not allow Sikhs to come in numbers. But the situation had stabilized. They call it stabilized. Right? Basically, they massacred the militants in about 93. So yeah, it was stabilized. And so Yogi, he spoke forcefully about we've got to stay together. We've got to stay with Punjabis. That means Hindus and Muslims as well. We've got to have solidarity. It's in all our interests to do that. And so a very powerful, forceful force for peace, even though he was on a hit list. Even in Canada, I know there was a case in Montreal where they tried to kill him. Many times people tried to kill Yogi for his stand. And so that's a huge, huge and very brave contribution he made. Another legacy item is all the Kundalini Yoga teachers are. People who studied under him, people who studied under people who studied under him. I mean, there's generations and generations and generations. And so I would guess there are tens of thousands of teachers in more than 100 countries. Namkar, you want to talk a little about that?
Sure, yeah. When I was living in LA, I wanted to just teach Kundalini Yoga for a living. This is back in the early 90s. And I had managed to build up the number of classes I taught. I basically went to people in their workplaces or their homes and taught small groups and some private classes. And just as I had kind of gotten that to the point where, it was not a full-time job, but doing well with it, I got a call from the Sri Singh Sahib out of the blue one day. And he said to me, I'd like to ask you sorry, my phone is talking to me. I'd like to ask you to volunteer at the Secretariat 20 hours a week. The Secretariat was where his staff worked. And my immediate thought was, oh no, I'll have to give up some of those classes. You know, I'll be too busy otherwise. And he said, and I don't want you to give up even one yoga class.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, yes, sir. Okay. So I started working there, and I was working with Guru Amrit Kaur, the Secretary General. And after a while, she said, you know, I don't really have that much for you to do. What do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to work for the teachers, because we need to find out what teachers in the field need. For example, every year we get these beautiful brochures for winter and summer solstice, but we get them like 2 months before the event. And people need to plan a year in advance and ask for time off from jobs when they're, you know, in a regular workplace. So we really need to find out from teachers what we can do better for them. And so that's kind of how we started, very grassroots, the International Kundalini Yoga Teachers Association. And at first I wanted to do a national association, because many countries in Europe and elsewhere already had national associations and we didn't have one. And she said, no, I think we need to be, we're international headquarters here. We need to be the umbrella for all the national associations, and we'll just roll the US into it. So that's how that came about. And after we kind of started going with it, and actually the Yogi Ji asked me to actually set it up as a membership at a certain point, create a membership for it. And he wanted it to coincide with the 25th anniversary of 3HO. So we did that in 1995 and formally launched IKTA, IKYTA. And he was very present in it with me from the beginning. He asked us to, I was working on a code of ethics, and I called him in Europe one day because there was a pressing question I wanted to ask him about how to word something so it wouldn't go out in our newsletter and not come from him. It was, I don't even recall what it was, but it was something he needed to kind of sign off on. So I reached him in Germany by some miracle, and he just started, out of him just came the solia supporting everything that you see on that document, the 10 facets of a teacher. And we just worked on the very like black and white details of the code of ethics, but everything else he basically dictated over the phone that day, and I was writing as fast as I could to capture it all. And then we started to talk about teacher training, and even though that was KRI's province, he asked us to kind of what's the word for that? Anyway, we did the work for that for KRI in a separate agreement. Subcontracted, I guess the word is. And so we started grandfathering teachers, and we started to form the new program for teacher trainers. And it was a very difficult process because we had teacher trainings around the world that were so different. One person was training teachers in 2 weekends. Somewhere else in Europe, they were training them in a 2-year program, a very thorough program. And somehow we had to bring together all these disparate trainings and opinions about what belonged in teacher training and make one international standard. And we worked on that for several years and went through several facilitators at our meetings. It was not an easy job. And at times I wanted to bang my head against the wall because I wasn't a teacher trainer at the time. I didn't have a yoga center. All these other people did. They had been out in the field, grassroots, doing this in their various cities and countries for years. And yet we still had to come to some common ground. And so I would often go to him with questions. And finally he said to me, okay, get the outline from every teacher of what they teach, bring it to me. And so we had a stack. I mean, as I said, these programs were so different and there were so many. And he said, I want you to teach a 3-level program, you know, practitioner, instructor, teacher, and it should embody the best of everyone, but he didn't give specifics. So again, it was really a challenge. And at one point, I wanted to, I had been told that on many boards, the people who were on the boards would either give donations themselves or be responsible to raise a certain amount of funds for that particular nonprofit. And, you know, as a very small nonprofit, totally self-funded, no funding from any other area, we needed to raise more funds. And this was one of the things I was going to bring up at the next board meeting. I knew it would be controversial, but I thought it was important. And I was working on it very early in the morning in my office before the meeting. And he somehow tuned into that, called me at the office and said, I know what you want to do. Don't do it. It's too much. We've already asked these people to sacrifice, and they've sacrificed a lot over the years, building their own communities. We can't ask them to build this. We will find another way. And I expect you to make profit. And I said, but it's a nonprofit. He laughed and laughed and just said, that doesn't mean that it can't make a profit. And so we started to put our heads together, the few of us who worked, you know, at this point for IKYTA, and came up with some products to raise money. And we started the first teachers conference, annual teachers conference. And he came and spoke at that. And again, I made a big mistake, but he covered for me so graciously. I didn't have a lot of pre-registration, so I didn't have a lot of money to get like this big fancy room in a Santa Fe hotel. So I ended up renting a basement in a hotel. And it was hot and stuffy, and about 70 people showed up. We had a good day working on our agenda. I asked them to bring in fans for when he came and spoke so he would be comfortable, because I knew that hot weather just didn't jive with his body type. And so we did our best, but I sweated through the whole thing thinking, I made so many mistakes. I don't have flowers here for him. They usually do that when they have a stage. I've got this hot, stuffy room. Why didn't I plan this better? And I was really miserable. I don't even remember listening to his talk because I was just counting all the ways that I had made mistakes and what I had to do better. And he so graciously, the next morning, I was doing some kind of save in the kitchen. He came into the kitchen and he said to me, Namkar, your conference was a big success. And I thought, God bless him. I mean, to give me any credit for it was silly, and to not complain about any of the things that could have been better was just so sweet of him. And he was always very sweet and encouraging and one-on-one like that with me during the whole process of forming IKYTA, and all the people who didn't like what we were doing on some level. I mean, I just assumed that every teacher around the world wanted to know what he said about everything, and particularly in terms of teaching and Kundalini Yoga. But I quickly found out that wasn't always the case. And a lot of people had been doing it their way for many years without any interference from headquarters. So, you know, I kind of became like a target for a while, and they called me like a policewoman, and like I was spying on them, which was not the case. I was pretty innocently just trying to unite everyone. So it was a challenge. And he gave me a lot of personal coaching and that kind of praise, you know, to really keep my spirits up and to keep going with it. And I had never really been coached on anything in my life. I wasn't into sports. I didn't have any particular musical talent. So it was the first time for me that I felt coached, supported by someone to reach a goal. And it was a really new experience for me that I really valued. And the other thing he did that was so adorable, in the very beginning, he sent me a volunteer, a beautiful young lady, to work with me and help get IKYTA off the ground. And her father paid her salary, and she worked with me, and it was just such a huge help to have a partner and a sweet young woman. And then the second person he sent to me was a young man who he was in school in India, and then his parents got a divorce during the school year. So they both remarried and moved to other countries. And by the time this young man was going to be coming home to Espanola, he had no home. His home had been turned into an office, and he had no parents, no family to come home to. So, but he wanted to come home and be with all his friends. And so the Siri Singh Sahib assigned him to work with me and said, okay, you need to adopt him. He's kind of like an orphan at this point. Yes, he has parents, but they're not here. And I want you to feed him and work with him and teach him and train him. And again, it turned out to be it sounded like a job to me in the beginning, but it was such a gift to me. I didn't have any children, and it was a wonderful experience. And he had a very dry wit, a sense of humor, and he was just a joy to work with. So he always managed to do so much at once and take care of so many people at the same time. And I really value that way that he could heal. It was just something. And it was something I saw for 30 years in so many instances.
Waheguru. I'm thinking halfway is in about 7 minutes. Up top, do you want to talk about how you were trained in Kundalini Yoga in Trinidad or wherever it might have been?
Go back a little bit to the history. I used to be an altar boy, and when I was 11 years old, I went to this library and I borrowed these books. And at the end of the book, it says there are two kinds of yoga you should not practice. One is called Kriya Yoga, and one is called Kundalini Yoga. And you need to have a competent guru to teach you this. And I did all the postures, and it was easy. And I decided, well, I'm not going to do anything else, because if these are the two that's dangerous and that's so crucial, then why waste time with the others, right? So then later on in life, along the way, a longer story, I finally got to someone who was teaching Kundalini Yoga in New York. And in those days, we were all hippies wearing the Levi jackets, the long hair. I had decided to stop cutting my hair in February 1972. When I came to the States, I said, okay, that's the last time I'm cutting my hair in my life. I came up just to get a visa and to come on up. So I came up and I met this guy, and he said, just come to 146 Bergen Street and come to class. That's it. No big initiation or anything. And I went there, and the yoga was fantastic. I felt great. I felt high. I felt super. I felt the Kundalini energy. And I decided I want to teach this to people in Trinidad, because there's nothing like this in my life I've experienced, and certainly nothing like this anywhere in the Caribbean. And I met a guy called Aftab Singh. He was from Tucson, Arizona. And he was one of the teacher trainers at the time. And I somehow got my way, similar to how Lifta did, by hitchhiking across country, and I got to Arizona. In those days, the teacher training was very different to how it is now. Now it's very streamlined, and thanks to people like Namka, etc., we have a set program going. In those days, you would teach, you would practice, you would do different things. And when you are ready, sort of, the teacher would take you to Yogi Ji and get his blessings. So that's what happened. After maybe a year or so, Satnam Singh took me to Los Angeles. I met with Yogi Ji, and he said, I asked for his blessings. And he said to me, Aftab, you're perfect in your knowledge. You're perfect with the teaching, but you have one problem. You know, the master's always going to find that spot, right? You know, that's the role of the teacher, is to find that weakness in the student. He said, but you have a weakness, and that's that one weakness. You have to cover that, and that's communication. He says, you know it all, but you cannot communicate it. You have to learn how to communicate it. So I've been working on communication all this time since then, 1973 to now. I'm still working on it. And Satnam Singh, and there's a guy called Gucharan Singh, who we knew from writing that Sadhana Manual, etc. He was in Pomona, so he was also another teacher trainer. And there were, I think, 3.5 teacher training ashrams at the time. One was in Washington, DC, one was in Tucson, one was in Pomona, and one was sort of halfway in Phoenix, Babadon. So he said I should go to Guru Charan and I should learn how to communicate, because Guru Charan is an expert at communication. And then there was a little bit of back and forth, and it was found out that Guru Charan couldn't be teaching me because he's out of the country. So Yogi said, okay, Satnam Ji, go and teach in Trinidad, and you will learn communication along the way. So I went to Trinidad and I started teaching. So it was very different. I became a teacher to how people are becoming teachers now. And strangely, the first job I got when I went to Trinidad was working in a radio station. And, you know, and I got a job as a technical engineer, recording stuff and playing things on air and recording what they call programs for people. And I would do massage on my part-time. And I met this guy who would come to massage, and he said to me, what do you do? I mean, besides massage? And I said, well, I teach yoga. And he says, that's wonderful. He said, would you like to teach yoga on the radio? He said, it's never been done before. He said he's been in Canada, he's been to the States and England, he never seen yoga on the radio. And we got talking about how we can teach yoga on the radio. And he was the head of the bank, the big bank in Trinidad. He had a lot of clout, a lot of power, political power. So he said, if you can get a package to me, I will get it on the radio for you. So he did that, and we got it on the radio. I had some really very good, beautiful students who Yogi Bhajan described as the most beautiful students he's seen in the world. It's from Trinidad. They were very devoted, very, dedicated. So he puts together a program with music and a jingle, and I started teaching yoga on the radio. But before I did that, I had to learn how to communicate. So I had to go to a speech therapist. I used to speak a lot worse than I'm speaking now. I used to speak very fast. My voice would trail at the end, and things like that. So I had to get sort of like announcer training. So that's how I started getting more students, if you want to call it, in Trinidad from the yoga program that I started doing 3 times a week. So it was quite different from a lot of the path, I guess. My path is quite different to like how yours was and how most other people are. They started going out to someplace and teaching. They could talk pretty well and all that. And now it's a lot easier for teachers to become a teacher by attending the training. My preference is the style that Namka started, the immersion. That when someone says they want to become a teacher, I say, okay, go and do the immersion course. And if you can't, go to New Mexico and do it, get the full thing. Because when you become a teacher, you want to experience the lifestyle, you want to experience the sadhana on a day, 24-hour basis. You want to go through that drill, I train teachers now, not in Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan, but the certification program, 200-hour program. And we do it like on weekends, every other weekend for 10 weekends. It's a quite different experience doing that. So living in an ashram, or if you can, we don't have many ashrams anymore, but you can go and learn how to be a teacher in an immersion course. I think that's a great way. But it's quite different still from the way in which it was done long time. When I first started teaching, I had a lot of hostility. Just like how when Yogi Bhajan started teaching here, he met a lot of hostility in India. I met a lot of hostility in Trinidad. At one time, I was sort of accosted in the street by some religious fanatics, very Christian guys. And they got me into a room and they would not let me out of the room until I would admit to them that I will not teach this yoga anymore, or I would accept their religion. And we went through this argument for a long time, very calmly. And we were there for like 5 hours. They wouldn't let me out of the room. There were like 6 guys, you know. And I eventually got out of the room by saying, I tell you what, you pray for me and you pray for my soul, because maybe I'm a lost soul. Maybe I'm going the wrong way. It's possible. Or maybe you're going the wrong way. So I'll pray for you, you pray for me. And that's how I got out of that. But, you know, so in the early days, there was a lot of hostility, a lot of resistance to Kundalini Yoga. Now everyone is teaching Kundalini. You go everywhere in the world, everyone is Kundalini Yoga. Every little studio now is saying, yeah, Kundalini, we work with Kundalini energy. But back in the 1970s and 80s, the word Kundalini was taboo. People didn't want to hear the word Kundalini Yoga. They associated it with all kinds of weird stuff. I remember having an interview with a TV station when I was trying to get Yogi G into Trinidad. And the first question the lady asked me, she says, isn't Kundalini Yoga so dangerous that you become insane and you get these snakes forming in your body? And these were the kinds of things you have to conquer and work with, you know. So it's very easy now for the younger generation to teach, because they can just go on out, sort of like the ice been broken for them. But in the early days, it was very tough, you know. So that's the kind of experiences I had in my early days. I'm not sure how it was with you, but similar to how Yogi G had that resistance in India. People were very much against him, and they would even get violent or hostile. So that's my sharing on that.
Very good. So you're a real pioneer in Trinidad.
Well, yeah, I think I'm not sure how many of the old pioneers who went out of the United States are still around, but I was sent out to Trinidad in 1973. That's when he said, give me the blessings, just go teach there.
Very good. And you can communicate now. You're doing pretty good.
Well, I'm working on it still. Yeah, I'm still trying to.
Can we take a break? What do you think?
Yeah, of course. Let's take a break.
We're going to take a little bit of a break. Thanks so much.
Okay.
I'm going to play some music. I don't know if it's going to work very well. Try and listen. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. Stretch your legs, go bathroom.
You can't be held in life, keep on going. Happy, the spirit flowing. Holy, I like creation. Everybody, where the years went by, we learned how to fly. Feet at the ground, head and eye in the sky. Wake up in the morning, fall in the morning. You're not getting home, and you are healthy. Keep on going. Happy, the spirit flowing. Holy, I like creation. Oh, creation is the place to go and experience down and gone. It's the worldwide family. It's a darling prayer and dream. So don't waste your time, don't stay behind, don't cling to things that are not true. Trust out these stars, reserve your voice. Infinity's waiting for you. Healthy, that's the goal. Happy, holy, I like creation. All creation is that place to go. Experience down and on. It's the worldwide family. It's a dawning Aquarian dream. Oh, outside in 69, American hippie scene. There came a yoga police and said things ain't what they seem. He came healthy, I'm going happy, keep the spirit flowing. Oh, holy, I like creation. I like creation. I like creation.
Satnam, everybody. Maybe we'll wait a couple of minutes till more people come back. Hey, Aftab is back. Sound check, Aftab, you can hear me? Well, we can't hear you, of course.
Yes, I'm hearing you. Yeah, fine.
Great. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just start then. So we're talking about Kundalini Yoga teachers all over the world, the starting of the International Kundalini Yoga Teachers Association. Another contribution, another legacy item is Yogaji gave us an institution. I mean, he started off, God bless him, you know, he was entertainer, he was a wise man, he was a counselor, he was father, sometimes he was mother. He was so many things, healer to us. And he was very fortunate in that, I think we were all fortunate in that I think it was 71, there's this young man full of fire. He's 15 years old. He comes to Yogaji to learn. Actually, Yogaji goes to his high school and gives a class, gives a talk. And this guy, kind of an upper class high school, they have more liberal arts subjects. He just loves Yogi Bhajan and what he taught. And so he started to come on a regular basis, started to come to sadhana, and just absorbing everything Yogaji had to teach. Yogaji said, you know, you guys should turn up at the Sikh study circle. There's no Gurdwara yet in Los Angeles, but the handful of Sikhs that were there, they had a study circle. They get together once a week and do kirtan. And so this guy, this 15-year-old, started to go and just soaking things up, learning yoga, coming for sadhana, hanging out with the Punjabis. And it really came to a crescendo, came to a high point when there were a group of Yogaji's students, mostly wives of his teachers, who went with his wife, Yogaji's wife, to India. And this fellow called Dale went together with them. And it was just so inspiring. They went to Amritsar, they went to, well, first they learned kirtan and they started to practice. You know, they started to practice kirtan, how to sing the songs of Guru Nanak, and then they went on a tour. They were like stars, because it was such a new thing to have folks from the West dressing in bana and not cutting their hair and not taking alcohol and singing the Guru's words. And so they'd have thousands of people turn up, and it was huge. And it was also just very humbling for him. He was learning Punjabi, and he was practicing, sharing with people, learning more Punjabi in Punjab. And just a beautiful young man. When he came back, Yogi Bhajan gave him a job to take care of the Guru Granth Sahib, which was in Guru Ram Das Ashram, to be there every morning to what's called Prakash, and to be there in the evening to close the thing down. And he had to come a few miles to do that. It wasn't easy for him, but he rode his bike and he didn't complain. And he inspired people. He learned Sikh history, started teaching Sikh history, learned how to pronounce, the Japji, and then he started teaching it. I remember I took a class with him at a summer solstice. He was just this humble young man. And so Yogiji gave him that job and gave him a title called him Bhai Sahib. The respectful title in the Sikh tradition means respected brother. And so he was there in Los Angeles. And I won't go into the whole long deal. He became basically a Sikh institution in himself. A great teacher, great inspirer. When people wanted to take the Amrit ceremony, he would be there, help them to do that initiation. And didn't live very long, had a car crash 2 years later. But he had established the institution through his life of Bhai Sahib. And Yogiji had first put that together and given him the title. So we had two people with big titles. One was Siddhi Singh Sahib. Yogiji we called Siddhi Singh Sahib. But also we had a Bhai Sahib. And so that's huge. Yogiji created that. Someone else picked it up. Guru Singh Khalsa picked it up, made a lot of contributions. And currently BBG, who's our Bhai Sahiba, she carries that. It's a little hard. She's mostly in Los Angeles, but she also has published books and taught a lot of people, inspired a lot of people. So that's another contribution, legacy item from Yogiji. Yesterday we talked a bit about the Temple of Steel. Yogiji had a vision that we have a golden temple at Amritsar. Why don't we have a temple of steel in the West? Yogiji would say he brought us from Woodstock, as hippies, to steel stock. So we should have a temple of steel. One of his students in Paris, an architect by the name of Guru Singh, made a beautiful design. And Guru Singh from London sent me a very articulated piece on that, which we'll have to share. Very detailed designs and backstories to that. Very beautiful vision that one day there will be a temple of steel at Ramdas Puri. We've been having our summer solstice. So that's also a legacy. And there's a Sikh Dharma ministry. I mentioned yesterday that up to that time, there wasn't such a formal ministry, wasn't an international ministry. In fact, it's kind of funny. The British came to India and they had their missionaries trying to convert everybody. And of course, the Muslims before that, under the Mughals, they tried the same. Well, just to have kind of a revenge, you could say, the Sikhs, when they got control of Amritsar again from the British, they started their own missionary college. They called it Sikh Missionary College. But the honest truth is they didn't train missionaries. It was all for internal consumption. And it's been that case for many, many years. And it was all men also. But the ministry Yogiji started was men and women. And, it was important to establish, again, Sikh Dharma, to have a place in our Western culture. We have a foundation, we have an institution, we have a hierarchy and so forth. Though, we're not so big on hierarchy, but it's just it's an institutional framework. One of the roles, one of the titles Yogiji gave under himself as Siddhi Singh Sahib was Mukhiya Singh Sahib. Mukhiya Singh Sahib, if you got the title Mukhiya Singh Sahib, it was almost like a kiss of death. Because Yogiji would say, I don't forget exactly how he put it, but when you become Mukhiya Singh Sahib, then sometimes your ego starts to really take over. And I'm a Mukhiya Singh Sahib. And next thing on Siddhi Singh Sahib passes on, I'll be the Siddhi Singh Sahib, and I'm the boss. And my God, Liftar Singh and Krishna are a couple of Mukhiya Singh Sahib, but they are the successful Mukhiya Singh Sahib. They are so sweet. There are people that I can email in administration. They'll never email me back, but those folks are very responsive and sweet and kind and knowledgeable. Those are the role models that Yogiji wanted. So that's all part of the ministry. And Mukhiya Singh Sahib literally means, or Mukhiya Sargani Sahiba, a spokesperson. So that's what he wanted. Not big shots, but just humble people. In fact, Yogiji said, the way the institution works, somebody made a pyramid once, and he says totally upside down. The way the pyramid works is upside down. The top is just everybody else, and then you have the yoga teachers, you have the ministry, you have the Mukhiya Singh Sahibs, and then I'm on the bottom. I serve everybody. That's how it works. And so that's the vision that he gave us of a ministry that serves everybody. And I mean, the more stories I hear of Yogiji at the airport or going to Trinidad, the way he served, heaven help us, I mean, I'm still working on, 10 times greater, but I just see, whoa, that's a big target. I'll never give up, but it's a big target. So anybody want to talk about the ministry? Nobody. My son, he says, younger generation, nobody wants to join the ministry because it's all the old fogies, basically. He didn't say it in those words, but ministry has some work to do. But, it's still there. It still has a newsletter. and hopefully one day it can be perhaps a little more representative. And that's perhaps a good segue to the next section, because I'm going to talk now about unfinished items, business things Yogiji gave us that he didn't finish, that we really have to finish and complete. And one of those interesting things, there's a story, I think it's a Finnish story really, but it's about the Unto Infinity group. And I don't know so much all the details about it, but Yogi set up this board, called it Unto Infinity. I know they had some charity golf tournaments. I don't play golf, but basically the people there, whether Yogiji, probably he knew they were going to do this. He was pretty intuitive, but they basically tried to take over a lot of our organization. I don't even know how much of it. Some people I'm sure know this better than I. And they ended up walking away with basically the Golden Temple Bakery and a lot of money. They had to be paid off. So it's interesting, you know, we got, after Yogiji passed, I think about 3 years later, there were folks who said, well, Yogiji's not looking, let's see what we can do. And even it penetrated, I think, to the very high levels of KRI, because we had the leader of KRI come to Toronto, and he was telling me, I told someone that story yesterday about how, you know, there's these smart people, they have a business vision of how things should be done. And I wasn't too impressed. And that head of KRI isn't with us as a head of KRI anymore. And the whole Unto Infinity, they were paid off, they're gone. And I'm grateful for that. So I'm just saying, he gave us some unfinished business, some house cleaning needed to be done. I think that chapter is finished. Another piece, and I spoke with BBJ, his wife, about this the other day. She said she's not bitter. She doesn't want this to be in the papers. It's not a big deal. So I'm not going to make it a big deal. But I do wish that the inheritance were settled satisfactorily, because that's just not nice. That he makes a will and the conditions of the will are not carried out. End of topic. Another item, and I mentioned it before, Miri Piri Academy. Some of you may know that it's in recess because of the COVID virus. They're not going to, there are people in the Sri Singh Sahib board who decided that we best not to convene school, not to have school in the coming year. And you know, in investigating, I found that you know, there are folks in the board who feel basically Miri Piri Academy bleeds money, and you know, it's Miri Piri Academy is a problem, and I feel Miri Piri Academy is vulnerable. You know, once you shut it down for a year, you can make arguments. You're going to lose students over a year, and you know, maybe just dump the thing. But my view is that Miri Piri is really a fulfillment of much of Yogiji's thinking. You know, creating an academy which is multicultural. I mean, a third of the students are Chinese, last I checked. Multicultural, it's in Punjab. You have opportunities of learning the Punjabi culture, learning the Punjabi language. Yoga is a part of the curriculum. You end up, I mean, Sri Singh Sahib's dictate, those who graduate from Miri Piri Academy, they have a diploma to be able to teach Kundalini Yoga. It's a very beautiful, beautiful thing. My son studied there for a few years, and worked there for a few years. From various sources that I have, I see that there's unfinished business, and I'll share with some ideas that I have, and I'm open to anybody's input. Perhaps there's somebody in the audience. I see some questions that come up. We'll deal with those later. Thank you, Ram Das Kaur. But I want to talk about Miri Piri Academy a little bit. One thing, and this ties in with, you know, there are some young people, we call them young people, like I'm 66, so young people, we call them in their 40s, young people, but there are folks, we call them second generation 3HO, who are very, very upset about different stuff. And they've had hearings. Some are upset about being abused in India. Some are upset about unfulfilled promises. And I was just in my research, I'm finding out that indeed, you know, the people who went to school in India, they were told that, we have these family business here, Yogi Tea, Golden Temple Bakery, Call Security. And if you go to school in India, you'll come back and you can start at the bottom, but you'll work your way to the top. And the information I'm getting is that that's not happening. You can graduate from Miri Piri Academy, and there's basically there's a whole area that needs to be covered, which is follow-up. Because Miri Piri Academy is such a pristine, beautiful place. If you end up going back to Detroit or Hamburg or Moscow or Caracas or wherever you go, so it's a big culture shock. But B, what the heck do you do with yourself? So I'm suggesting to have less rage at the younger level. They really need to be served. You can't just plunk them into India and then plunk them back and expect everything is going to go great. It's not. They need guidance for education opportunities, where to go after Miri Piri. You need career guidance, and if they're promised positions in companies, those promises need to be fulfilled. So there's a culture shock. There's follow-up. I mean, it's not just find a perfect school. It's not a perfect school. Even if it were a perfect school, an idyllic place in Amritsar, and they expect everything is done. It's not. So there needs to be follow-up. It's also been suggested that there be a counselor. I mean, granted, it's difficult to get bullying out of anything. I was talking with Krishna Kaur the other day, and we're talking about bullying, and she said, we get bullied every day. The advertisers bully us, the politicians are bullying us. There's so much bullying that happens in family, outside family, in school, at work. But on campus, the children, the youngsters should be protected to some extent, and would help them to have a counselor, someone who has an ear for them, someone who can give them guidance. Prakash Kaur, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would really like to speak to this issue of Miri Piri and, as you mentioned, rage from the young people. And I'm not sure it's as simple as the bullying aspect of it that's coming up. As I didn't go to Miri Piri, but I was sent away to boarding school, so I have my own experiences about that. And I've also visited Miri Piri, so I'm familiar with the school itself, and it does look so beautiful there in it's in Anandpur Sahib, right? And it really does look lush. I know from my own experiences, when I was asked about boarding school initially, I would have said this was a really amazing gift that I was given. It was a privilege, and it gave me opportunities in the workplace. These kind of promises that you were speaking to. What I became aware of as I started doing 6 years of psychotherapy for various kind of flashbacks coming up and similar things to what this second generation of young people are talking about now, is that the actual act of being sent away from those that you're attached to as a child is really extremely damaging to the psyche. And I think maybe the yoga can address some of this, maybe not, I'm not sure. But what I see from people commenting now is this kind of deep split in the psyche from having to, work out how you would be sent away from everybody that you love and people who are meant to care for you into an environment where at best somebody is looking after 10, 20, 30 other children. So I think it is something that really needs a lot of careful listening to people who've been there, because not everybody will have that experience. Some people will have really positive experiences, but some people will have been really damaged. I think there's really good evidence now coming out of something called boarding school syndrome, that because these wounds can be healed as well, and we actually have the perfect technology for that. But of course, what we're in danger of happening is the very things that can help heal are going to be the things that are rejected because they're seen as coming as a package.
Mm-hmm. That's ironic. It's ironic. And you know, it's a funny thing. I mean, I'm a bridge builder kind of person. I don't shut people off. I don't cut people off. Yogaji didn't. So that's the example that I follow. And I emailed, you know, the lady who wrote that book that got published in January every once in a while. She helped me with writing the biography to a degree. There's certain questions nobody else could answer, so she was helpful. But I emailed her back. I read her book. And I emailed her at one point and I said, partly from your experience now, Prakash Kaur, do you remember we talked about, you know, God bless her. She's such a warrior. She went to the, what do they call it, the White Bird and the Golden Cage Facebook group. She joined the group and was trying to do counseling there. And it was so insane, you know. But partly based on your experience, you want to say something?
Well, I learned very quickly that was a huge mistake on my part to try to do counselling on that group. I think you're absolutely right. I did start. It was very misguided to think that people on that group would want fixing, you know. And so I was told that's really in very clear terms that was not what was needed. I learned my lesson. What I really stayed put on that group for a long time because I felt like I wanted to speak to some kind of neutrality. You know, we talked a lot at the time, didn't we, Guru Fatha Singh, about the polarization that was happening in the community.
Yeah. So what I'm getting at is partly based on your experience. I wrote the author of that book, and I said, you know, hey, congratulations on your book. I know what it is to write stuff and try and get it published. So congratulations on that, and congratulations. I may have congratulated her on her, you know, she's achieved some degree of fame, you know, good for you. But I cautioned her, you know, that that what she's doing in that she's triggering a lot of people, whether in or outside of 3HO, she's triggering a lot of people to experience trauma. And the question is, what do you do with that? I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I've done research on this. Who's his name? There's a fellow in, I mean, basically the best research we have now that shows that talk therapy doesn't really help. Often it just reawakens the wounds. And one of the best things you can do is body-mind therapy. And Kundalini Yoga is very rigorous in this. So I said to her, you know, congratulations on all that, but you've got to know that by your work, you are barring that route of therapy, perhaps the best in the world, for people to find their satnam, to find their intrinsic, healthy, happy, holy being. Because they don't want to do Kundalini Yoga, Hatha Yogi Bhajan. It's going to freak them out. So I said, you've got to be aware of that. She didn't like the comment. She emailed me back, said, you didn't read my book, did you? Well, of course I did. But she didn't like the comment. But it's true. It's a dilemma. Aftab Singh, you want to say something for a moment?
Well, you know, we all yogis, and we all were trained or have taken up some training with Yogi Ji, and we qualify ourselves to be teachers, and some of us are more equal than others in that way.
Can we just stay on the trauma topic? Were you going to change subject on this?
No.
Okay,
I'm getting to that.
Okay, sorry.
So what I'm saying is that as yogis, we need to see the positive and the negative in everything. So in Mary Perry, for example, the abuse there and the book that was published, it may seem to be very negative in some way, and it also is very positive. So we have to be able to see the value of the book too, and the publication, like how you said, it brought people out, for example, to talk more. The people in Mary Perry are probably talking out more. The idea of abuses that may have happened or not in Mary Perry or elsewhere. Getting those people to talk and to come out more is great. there's a little bit of an issue here in that they're talking to the older heads. And this is one part that maybe the organization might look at as far as resolving things, is that we, like me, for example, I should say, I'm an old head. I think in a certain kind of way. I've been trained in a certain kind of way. The things that I would consider abusive or not abusive would be considered very highly abusive now to people. The way that Yogiji talked to me, the way he yelled at me, could be considered very abusive now. But to me, I saw it as a spiritual practice, as a spiritual way, in his way of teaching. So people have developed certain what is called sensitivities now, and they relate to things differently. So I think the way that a lot of these things should be handled would be to allow the younger generation to handle this. The younger students, the younger teachers, the younger teacher trainers, people who are possibly under 30, 35, 40, or under that age, let them resolve that because they will understand that better. We may have a generation gap. We mightn't want to admit it. We may say, well, we are understanding, we are sensitive. But I think on all these kinds of abuses and people on the side of asking, why don't we talk about sexual abuse and sexual assault? These things should be talked about by people who can probably relate to it more at this stage of development. My way I approached it would be quite different. Like I said, I could claim that Yogi Bhajan abused me, you know, based upon the standard that some people are using now. But I don't feel it that way. I don't feel he abused me. He yelled at me. He cursed me out. He chewed me out. You know, he caused me a lot of physical pain, personally. He also was very gentle and very touching. He very lightly touched me too. So I see the balance there, and my relationship with him is different to how these other people are. So we have to be sensitive to that, and that we can't have our old way as our old standard sort of thing address the younger people. Let the younger people work with that. Let them talk to each other. Let them find a way out of that. That's my comment on the abuse part.
You want to, Aftab Singh, you want to just tell briefly the story about your driving and he pinches your thigh? Tell that story.
Yeah, well, well, I can tell you the two stories, really. So I should counter them because, like I said, as a yogi, you need to.
No, just tell me one story. Tell the one on the pain story.
Okay, the pain story was I was driving on the right-hand side because in Trinidad you drive on the right side of the car, and we were going from the hotel to the mayor's office or something.
Your phone has no data connection, so I can't help you with that at the moment.
I'm not sure, maybe that's my phone doing that. Let me just power it off. Yeah, so we were driving from the hotel to one of someplace, the president's house or something. And he put his hands on my thigh, on my leg. And now some people may say right away, oh, he put his hands on your thighs? That's sexual abuse, you know? He rested his hands on my leg. I didn't see it as that. And then he, looking through the window on the left side, he doesn't look at me, doesn't look at anything. He starts pinching me, really excruciatingly pinching me. And he knows he's doing it. He knows I know he's doing it. He's not acknowledging it, and I'm not acknowledging it either, right? And he continues pinching. And if you know Yogi Bhajan, he's very powerful, he's very strong. And my first impulse was, say stop. I could just say stop. I could just say, okay, I don't want you to do that. And then because of my relationship with him, I say, fine. He is my teacher. It's like Vaisakhi. When the gurus went and they had to give their heads, I said, okay, he's my teacher. Do whatever you like, you know? And in that excruciating moment, the minute I said that in my mind, he stopped. He knew somehow that I had gotten the message. I just let go. but it's a different kind of relationship. But if I did that to a student, now they'll put me in court. They'll say he abused me. First he put his hands on my leg, then also he created this extreme pain. He could have actually pinched off a piece of flesh from my thigh, and that would be abuse. So how do we judge that? How do we say spiritually this was abusive or not? It's the person who's receiving it would determine that. I mean, I could have gotten angry and I could have reacted in some way like people are doing now. So each person is valid. Their complaints are valid based upon their own whatever template that they're running from. But the way to address this, I think, in a big way, and maybe the women should get more involved with this than the men, because I would think the younger women, people like Nam Prakash, for example, she should get more involved in forming that group. And people are angry. When people are angry, they don't hear. So people are venting on the websites and they're doing this whole thing on the Facebook. They're angry. And they should be angry because that's their experience. That's how they are programmed to be. Mm-hmm. They're not into this mode like I was programmed to be. So for me, I would say, hey, okay, so you hurt your leg. So what? Not a big deal. Pain is gone. Let it go, right? But other people may have a different way of approaching that.
Right. Thank you, Aftab Singh. That's a great story. Yeah. You know, if you just, can you hang back a little bit? Because I know this is getting us going. I think everybody wants to speak. Let's just, I want to speak about Miri Piri. So this is a little side note on Miri Piri. Let me finish with Miri Piri, and then we'll go on. We'll get deeper into this a little later. And there's a couple of folks, I think it's very important. We want to talk about how to teach Kundalini Yoga in the current atmosphere, which is very challenging. We're not going to neglect that. So let's get to that as well. But let me finish with Miri Piri Academy. So there's the issue. There needs to be follow-up for the students. It would be very helpful to have a counselor on staff for the students. If they're promised jobs, those promises should be kept. Also, I am advised that staff could use more training. I mean, the way they say it is they survived by the grace of God. Nothing really horrible happened over that, but they could use training in dealing with students with suicidal thoughts, for example, self-harm, how to talk with students about sex, how to talk to them about sex education, racism, substance abuse, bullying. You know, how do you deal? The staff doesn't have much training in that. They had one little training about bullying. That was it. Professional development. I mean, generally teachers everywhere have professional development. It would be great to build their confidence and to build their knowledge of current best practices. And ideally, it wouldn't be just once every 5 years. It would be maybe a couple of times a year. Just a little refresher. And frankly, they could use more staff. I'm told that, you know, there would be staff meetings, but the staff would be falling asleep because their hours, when either you're actually working or you're on duty, as they say, or on call, would be from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m., 6 days a week. And if somebody is sick or somebody's away, then it's not 6, it's 7 days a week. That's hard. Oh, 40-day savers. They had 40-day savers around the Golden Temple. Then your hours are longer too. They go beyond 5 to 11 at night. So more staff. I understand it costs money, and the trainings cost money. But these are heartfelt recommendations for the school to go forward and to prosper. And lastly, the staff need to be taken care of. God bless, there's a Saraswati Kaur. She has about 7 jobs. One of them is human resources. That's just not reasonable. She can't do all that. So even to do human resources takes staff. And so that's just a brief summation of how Yiri Piri is also a work in progress. I mean, how it physically has flourished now from that dry place it used to be into just a very beautiful place is a marvel to behold. But yeah, I think we need some advocacy with the Sri Singh Sahib board just to impress upon it the importance of Miri Piri Academy, but also to really go forward in a positive way. Miri Piri needs some structural work as well. And with the year off, perhaps that'll be a good time to do that. So that's just Khalsa Council. God bless. You know, people sometimes I never, well, I did visit once the Khalsa Council. I was in the Bhai Saba's section as a, when the Bhai Saba first became Bhai Saba, but I really haven't had any serious experience on the Khalsa Council or on the Siri Singh Sab board. But some people are telling me that, you know, present and past members that, there's work to be done there as well. That sometimes the Khalsa Council, or let's say the Siri Singh Sab board, that's where the power resides, is a little bit ingrown, a little bit American-centric. There's a kind of a power axis that runs between Herndon and Espanola. That can be problematic, especially if you're dealing with a global organization with a global membership. That needs to be worked on, and you know, we really have to be humble. The higher you go, the more humble you have to be, and power seeking really doesn't belong there. I mean, I think all the members are elected. How to solve that? Well, the best thing I can know is prayer. But maybe some dialogue. People need to talk to each other, and people need to speak amongst each other. I just got a letter. I think many of us might have got that letter from the president of the Sri Singh Sab Corporation, Guru Jodha Singh, and he's suggesting we all join in trusting our goodwill rather than impugning our goodwill, rather than doubting our goodwill. We all want this thing to work. We need to be humble though to do it. We need to communicate well. I have the three remaining topics, just four, let's say, are I want to a little bit about subliminal racism. Another is unresolved trauma. Nam Prakash, center stage to you on that. And a new development about Black Lives Matters. And then we'll go into teaching Kundalini Yoga under the current climate. If you have another topic, any of you, whether panelists or other speakers. Yeah.
Could I add to what you were saying there about the Khalsa Council? It sounds like
Yeah.
sort of giving up on them a bit.
Not really.
Is one flaw that I think that we have as an organization is that the older heads are holding on to power. They're holding on to authority. They're holding on to that, whether it's because of the finances are backed by it or the status is connected to it for whatever reason, whether it's the status or the money or whatever, or both. We need to have people who are younger, very young in this organization, who are taking charge, and especially with the abuse matter, all those people who are complaining now, we should invite them in and say, hey, okay guys, we want to move forward with this. We want you to help us move forward with this. You'll be compensated in whatever way. Why don't you get together, form a group, and let us find some resolution from this in the way that you think it should be, not the way in which we want to impose on them and bully them into being. But let's say, I'm not sure how many people, but let's say there were 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever number of women or young people who felt they were mistreated. Let them become part of it. So this way they become part of the solution and not so much part of a problem for us. So considering the Khalsa Council, I would say the same thing. Introduce more younger people into the whole organization.
Good point. I mean, I think the median age of the Khalsa Council is it 70? It must be. I mean, it's way up there. And you know, I think in getting young people to be engaged, anybody who tries to do that job is going to perhaps encounter some of the same obstacles I found in getting people to get on this panel, you know, because people are so traumatized. Maybe they've written off the whole thing and don't even want to be associated with it. But I think it's an excellent idea, Aftab Singh, and hopefully it can work. Nam Prakash Kaur?
Yeah, I agree that it's a really excellent idea to listen very attentively and to invite the people who are very angry with this organization and with Yogi Bhajan and really and I think even if like when I'm working with psychotherapy clients, I work a lot with women who've been sexually abused, I always believe them, even if there's a part of me that is holding that, you know, this story could be being remembered differently to how it actually happened because of the trauma and PTSD. But in that moment when I'm listening to the story, it is, you know, this is the best version that they can, the best story they can kind of cognitively tell about what's happened to them, and there's a reason for telling it. And if that can be really heard, if that can really land with me, then healing can start to happen, because it's only when you've, you know, been really able to find a narrative for the story that you can start to heal. So I think that there is a danger, however, of anger is like, I see it as like a middle level on the path to healing. So it's, if we look at, like, if you know about the theory of the vagal nerve, you know, the in polyvagal theory, the vagal nerve, Yogi Bhajan called it the mind nerve, I think. And at the bottom of this ladder of the vagal nerve, in one, when it's in its state of most distress, in the dorsal vagal nerve, you're dissociated and you're in a freeze state. And there's no mobilization to heal. And I think that's where a lot of these women have been until Prem Kaur's book. And I think same with Miri Piri, you know, it's not been able to, there's been no ability to share the stories and be really heard and believed. And so they've stayed in this dorsal vagal dissociated place with it. Now they're beginning to mobilize and move into like a sympathetic state where there's fight or flight is possible, and they're really in fight. And this is, you know, when you go on these on that Facebook group, it, you know, there's a lot of mention of Kali and Durga and the fight, tremendous
the warrior
fight.
goddesses, the warrior goddesses.
Absolutely, which is to be completely honored. And that's not the highest state of healing. There's a place that they need to reach the ventral vagal system, where they're into a state of more neutrality, compassion, curiosity for the other side. You know, there's no curiosity in that group about, well, if Yogi Bhajan did these things, what was happening for him? And I've just been on the trainers forum the last 3 days, 300 people who are in the academy, you know, on training teams from, I'm just an intern, but, you know, lots of lead trainers and professional trainers. And I was really pleased with these 3 days. There was a lot of really good listening happening, and a lot of people who are really in that ventral vagal state of being able to be curious. A lot of the first generation teachers really inviting, like Aftab Singh is saying, to, you know, the younger generations to come forwards and say, how is it for you? And how do you see us being able to go forwards with teaching what Yogi Ji gifted us, and not losing all the preciousness of his genius as we go forwards. So I think it's important that whilst we invite people who've been affected by the sexual abuse, and people who've been affected by the allegations as well, it's triggered their stories, maybe, that kind of thing, anywhere where the patriarchal paradigm of the Piscean age is still lingering, you know, through the Miri Piri Academy, through 3HO, that the angry people don't get so much freedom that they can hijack the whole thing. Because this is just I see this as being a really important growthful period where they come through the sympathetic system into the ventral system. But so when I'm working with women who've been sexually abused, sometimes, you know, for many, many years as young girls, it's great to see them being angry, but I begin to realize that their therapy is coming to an end when I begin to hear them be able to speak with compassion about their abuser. When they can begin to say, I wonder what was going on for dad, uncle, so-and-so, that they could do this. And they begin to be more curious about that. And then I think real healing is happening, because then it really won't matter whether we've got Yogi Bhajan's pictures on our studio walls and we quote him, or, you know, because real healing will have happened. Whilst people are still being triggered, that we're not, that healing is not complete yet. So I think it's important that the anger doesn't get a chance to be destructive, that it's clean, it can be spoken about. Really clean anger is a very powerful place to be, right? Oh, Yogi Bhajan used it quite a lot in his...
Yeah. I think Aristotle said that anger is a very powerful force, but very few people can use it intelligently. And Yogiji was very good with that. Very good with that. So let's go. Again, there's 3 more topics. Just very quickly, I want to talk. I talked about this before. This is my big thing these days. I wrote an article. You can find it at fathaSingh.com/story. My parents are German, right? So I take racism very, very seriously. And one of my challenges was to learn Punjabi, and it was very hard. But now I can do it, and I just find, I think I've already given this talk before, haven't I? About reaching people's hearts through their language. And basically, you know, I was joking with my son the other day, you know, basically we're kind of a white supremacist organization, by appearance at least. You know, all these whiteys here wearing their whites, it looks pretty bad. We don't have the hoods, but we're pretty close, pretty close. And I think, you know, there can be a sense of complacency, you know, oh, I'm not racist. But, you know, there are people who wouldn't come today. And, you know, they pick it up. They'll pick it up before you do. They come into a room of 3 HOers, they're all pink-skinned, they can pick up the racism. And in fact, there's a member from the Espanola community just wrote a piece. She's Indian, married a black fellow, and she had a very bad experience, and she wrote about it. I can direct you to that. So it's there. I know it's there. Ruby, who was in our last series of presentations, she talked a bit about it. I mean, we have work to do. And so I won't say much more. Punjabi Sikho, Ji. That means learn Punjabi, for heaven's sake. Next, unresolved trauma. Have we covered that? Anybody else wants to talk about unresolved trauma, institutional trauma, individual trauma? We pretty much covered that, haven't we? You know, I'm going to do Aftab Singh Ji. I think your suggestion is so great. I know you're burned with the Khalsa Council and you're burned with those guys, but if you'd like, you can have input. I'd be happy to send, because I'm on reasonable terms with, good terms with Krishna. I think I'm on good terms with Kaur Khalsa, and they're both on that board. I think your suggestion is excellent. I'd like to write them that. I'll cite you. And if you want to have any input into, you know, that recommendation, I welcome your input.
I don't think I'm the best person to cite on that, because I'm not really very much liked by the KRI trade show organization anymore. There are a couple of people there who would like to see me in jail, actually.
You too?
Yeah, I'm very, you know, I have unsubscribed from every single newsletter, notification, and email from every entity except the Sikh ministers part. So I don't know what's going.
I won't cite you then.
Yes. So don't cite
it's
me.
non-Kaur's idea, right? Just joking.
Or just make an idea from anybody. But
idea from anybody. Okay.
Yeah. Because I've had a lot of conflicting. I still do actually have some conflicting, unresolved matters with them, which I think I'm right about, and they think I'm not.
Fine. Okay.
Yeah. Especially with teacher training and stuff like that.
Anybody?
I just wanted to jump in with something that came up at the trainers forum these last few days about, there was one of the breakout rooms that got a large number of people attending, was about separating out KRI from the umbrella organizations, from Siri Singh, Saib, Kaur, and I don't know whether Namkar could speak to that, or but it was attracting a lot of interest that
Why separate? Why?
So again, I'm not the best person to speak about this, but the arguments for separating it out was that one of the reasons was to separate it out from Sikh Dharma, that we didn't need Kundalini Yoga linked to Sikh Dharma. They could be two separate entities, that instead of being a non-profit organization under Siri Singh Side Core, it could be independent and responsible to its members. So those were the two big.
CARE is already a separate organization from Sikh Dharma, so that's an interesting discussion that must have been had. But I wanted to speak for a moment back to Midi Pity, in that I haven't heard that a lot of the kids who went to the school, older kids who abused younger kids, I haven't heard a forum where they are addressing that and apologizing with the kids they abused, because it wasn't just teachers and staff who abused kids, it was kids who abused younger kids generally, from some of the horror stories I've heard. And I think that they have work to do also. They may be angry and blaming from their experiences, but they were also, some of them, part of the problem from what I understand and what I've heard. So it's a pretty involved situation, because if it happened to you, maybe you feel justified doing it when you're older. And I know that some of the older kids had to play the role of protecting younger kids, and then they were put in that uncomfortable situation, which they shouldn't have had to be in either. So there's a lot of trauma on many levels, and I did not listen to all those hours in which the second generation spoke. So maybe they have been addressing this, but if they haven't, I hope that they will own up to their own bullying that they did, and why they did it, and apologize to the kids and the parents who they abused. The other thing I thought was interesting is that a lot of the second generation who have claimed different kinds of abuse at the school turned around and sent their own kids to the school. I don't understand that. How bad could it have been if they sent their children back to the school that was so horrible? So this is confusing to me. There must have been enough good things at the school that they could have overlooked it. Again, another issue, and something I'm not that involved with. I have a stepson who went there, and I've heard a lot from him and worked out, between him and his father and I, a lot of that, and his anger at us for sending him there. And then we asked him, well, what were the good things about going there? And there were a lot of good things that he felt that he also got out of going. So anyway, on that level, but in terms of the CARE Sikh Dharma issue, my personal opinion is, CARE is already a separate nonprofit. 3HO is a separate nonprofit. IKYTA is an association under the umbrella of 3HO. Sikh Dharma is its own entity. So they already are separated. And I would think that, I think CARE has a very big decision coming up as to what they're going to do. I don't know if they're waiting for the results of the olive branch, but there's a lot of pressure for them to drop Yogi Bhajan out of the picture, and they're going to have to decide whether they're going to do that or not. That's, I think, the main issue at hand. And in terms of teaching Kundalini Yoga, I'd like to address that. For myself, it's very, very easy. I do not believe any of the stories.
Can we just wait a minute? That's the last subject. We're almost there.
Okay. We'll go back. Sure.
But thank you. And to give a bit of credit, I did hear I heard very little of the testimonial from the Miri Piri youngsters. And there were a couple that said, yes, I was abused, then I abused the youngsters. I'm just passing it on, and I'm sorry. So a few have had that revelation. But I just want to share a bit of good news. I think he's the president of the City Singh Sap Corporation, Guru Jodha Singh. I mean, he was in the news for me twice. Once he sent a letter, I think I just got it today, that in fact there is a court case now in Los Angeles that one of the complainants has launched a few days ago. So he's keeping us abreast. But some good news from Krishna Singh in Espanola. He's telling me that now, so in Minnesota, Black Lives Matters, George Floyd, is it? Yeah, George Floyd was killed, right? And he had a funeral in Texas, and Guru Jodha Singh went there as a representative of us, and made some really good connections. And Krishna Singh said he was given an interview, an hour-and-a-half interview, which he videotaped, and that he's now editing for. I didn't catch what the organization is, but the next is that he was invited to go to Minnesota, and he's going to speak with the Black community up there. And if you don't know, Guru Jodha Singh is African American. And so it just looks like there's an interesting opening there. I mean, the Nation of Islam has made inroads with the Black community in America for many years. And we've just sort of sit back. I mean, we've had Krishna with us, Guru Jodha. Haven't really done much outreach in the Black community, but this might be a interesting time, you know, just even as we're getting attacked in one way, going out into a very specific community, providing hope and guidance and empowerment in another way. So anybody, anything on that? And then we're on to the last topic. Okay, so Namkar, go ahead.
Yeah, anyway, as I was saying, for me, when I teach Kundalini Yoga or participate in a teacher training, it's very clear for me personally how to present Yogi Bhajan because of my personal experiences with him for 30 years. I don't believe any of the accusations made against him. I can understand that some of the women that may have said that there was inappropriate statements or behavior may have experienced it that way because of what Aftab Singh said, that, you know, if you experience it that way, then yes, you feel betrayed, you feel abused. But in terms of the more serious sexual allegations, I know all the women and I don't believe any of the stories. I would never believe any of them over Yogi Bhajan, knowing him as well as I know him. There's just no doubt in my mind that that's not the person he was. So for me, when I teach, you know, I still can 100% give him credit for Kundalini Yoga, for the way of life he taught us, for all the things he brought us, for the husband he gave me, for the dog he gave me, for so much. There's an insurmountable, indescribable amount of gratitude I feel in my heart for him. And that's all I can say when I teach. And I know for teachers who weren't as close to him, didn't have as much personal experience or never met him at all, that is, you know, it's more of a difficult choice. But I think that we've all heard in the social media a lot from the women who are accusing him. And I think that the teachers out there need to hear a lot from the women who aren't accusing him and who say, I was with him alone in many, many circumstances where something could have happened and nothing happened. He was never anything but a gracious, fatherly, loving teacher. And if they hear that a lot, that could help maybe them decide, who do I believe? Which teachers do, because he's not here to say it for himself. So who do I believe? These 12 teachers who say they knew him and nothing happened and they don't believe it, or these 12 women who are saying something happened? So, you know, everyone's going to have to decide that for themselves based on who they know, what teachers they know, who they trust, and what they feel in their own heart, maybe from their relationship they have with Yogi Bhajan through a dream, through the Kundalini Yoga, through meditating on his picture, through their intuition. What do they believe and how do they want to present that?
Unmute. Prakash Kaur, you never met Yogi Ji. Do you want to add anything to that? How do you teach Kundalini Yoga?
Well, I'm reflecting on, I haven't changed the way I'm teaching a huge amount. I still mention him and I still quote him. I haven't done the Tritakum meditation since the allegations came out, I have to say. I haven't been that controversial yet. I think it's been a really great thing for these allegations to come out, regardless of whether he did them, because I think it's given a chance to really reset us onto a more adult path of not idealizing him, because he always said to not do that. He said, "Don't. I'm not the guru," and yet wherever we've put him on a pedestal, we'll have been hurt by these allegations. And so it's giving us a chance to reset on that and bring the guru into our own hearts. So for me, if he did it, then, you know, I'm going to search deeper for the abuser. That some part of me is not healed yet, and I'm going to do ho'oponopono, you know, please forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you, I love you, you know, and keep that in my heart, and see what healing is possible, and to keep a sense of, you know, we would give, we would want dignity for all, right? We would, even the lowest of prisoners in a jail somewhere, if they were being mistreated, we would say they should have their dignity. So I don't see why Yogi Bhajan should be stripped of his dignity, whether he did this or not. And I have to say, I don't know. And I think that's a very, you know, it's good for us to be able to say we don't know, because in our narcissistic communities, you know, the white patriarchy, which I'm afraid the British are largely responsible for around the world, we're not very good at saying I don't know. We like things very black or white, you know. So I was watching a comedian doing a sketch the other day where he came out, it's a black comedian, and he came out saying, well, I don't know about this idea of calling me black, and he put a paint chart against his skin, you know. And he was saying, actually, he says, I think I'm chocolate love. And he went to the white woman in the audience and he said, and I don't think you're white, I think you're peach Melba. You know, and I thought, yeah, there's many very, you know, we're just so rich, aren't we, as a species? So that's where I'm at with.
Thank you. Aftab Singh, how do you teach Kundalini? How do you mention Yogi Bhajan in your class?
I talk about Yogi Bhajan all the time because he's my spiritual teacher. And he is the reason why I'm alive here in a lot of ways. But I do not teach Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan trademark. I'm not part of the franchise in that way. So I have a lot of issues with that. And I've brought some of that up with NAMCA before and KRI. And I believe the system is very flawed, and it encourages, actually it will encourage in the future more abuses the way it is structured now. But my teacher and the way in which I've learned from him is fantastic. His teachings are great. They're the best teachings in the world as far as yoga goes, as far as I'm concerned. So I will always teach Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan without the trademark after it. So this is what I do. Right now I do teacher training. I train people with certification. It's different from spiritual teacher training. It's just teacher training to get certified. It's worse than the KRI system, the one I'm using. The KRI system is a system where we churn out people in a factory. We have a mass production factory rolling off teachers, and not really making spiritual teachers. So I'm kind of like involved with that, with the studios and stuff around where I am. But when it comes to the Kundalini Yoga teaching on a one-on-one basis, I teach as Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan, just without the trademark.
Good, Aftab Singh. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I teach Kundalini Yoga as well as taught by, I don't get the KRI certification. Frankly, KRI doesn't give me much respect. They have, the reviewers, they've reviewed and given seal of approval to a couple of books, but I am just the lowliest of the lowly. No credit was given for the years I had to immerse myself to do his biography. I had to immerse myself. Just taught very few classes. I originally was given my so-called certification. I was told to go to Winnipeg and start an ashram in 1974 after my teacher training, which was first you go to Toronto, you do your daily sadhana. I don't think that's a requisite anymore, daily sadhana, but we did daily sadhana, teach a class a week, and no booze, no women, no craziness. Get married. I was married at 20. And you go to Washington D.C. and the idea was work your heart out. Do your sadhana every day, and go to the restaurant in the morning and wash dishes or whatever it is, and come back around midnight and then start again. If you can survive that, you can go start an ashram in Timbuktu. And so that was the deal. But frankly, I don't care about certificates. Yogi Ji didn't parade his certificate. In fact, he wrote his own certificate and the U.S. Customs asked him about it. Yeah, definitely I teach Kundalini Yoga as he taught, and I'm not shy about it. I make my own certificates. I have my own organization here, and I'm not shy about that. I don't need Charan Singh or anybody, mostly a stranger to me in New Mexico, signing on for me. I don't care for that. And I've been to New Mexico. I've been to a lot of places where with a morning sadhana, there's nobody there. I know KRI once had a 40-day deal where apparently all the employees were going to do sadhana every day. I thought to myself, must be a problem here. Why are they saying they're going to do that? Must be some issue. But anyway, I think Aftab Singh, just follow the standard Yogi Bhajan set. The standard is very high. And I'm personally troubled. I don't understand, and perhaps Namkar being more of a, spent time in New Mexico, understand what the hell went on, that Yogi Ji commissioned a biography 20 years before his passing. It can be submitted 10 years before his passing, and 20 years after his passing, still there's not the go-ahead to publish the thing. Whereas, as I was saying yesterday, the model I used was the Prabhupada biography, the founder of Krishna consciousness. His biography, and a beautiful one, came out 3 years after his passing. So there's something very twisted, either organizationally or psychologically. Something is weird. I'm happy to be the standard carrier of Yogi Bhajan's biography, but I wonder, and the young people will tell you, we have a problem not only in Espinal but everywhere, but worshiping rather than aspiring to being 10 times greater. We have an issue that I can see, in merchandising and making products out of these teachings rather than treating it as a mission, which is how I came to it, as Aftab Singh came to it. I think most of us came to it as a mission rather than a marketplace where we buy products and buy services. But yeah, I'm still just gobsmacked that there hasn't been whereas BBG was able to publish a biography, in Punjabi, a biography the year after Yogi's passing, that the organization, whether we call it Sikh Dharma International or pick a name, no arms of that organization saw fit to publish that. It may be something personal I'm not liked in New Mexico. I don't know, and I don't really care, but I'm still gobsmacked by it, and I think that needs some fixing in somebody's head. Namkar, do you have any input on it?
Well, I just wanted to say, having read the,
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Speak.
I just wanted to say thank you for the. I've read the autobiography, and got so much from it, and told so many people stories from it. So yeah, it seems a shame that it can't be made more widely known. I just wanted to speak to this putting Yogi Bhajan on a pedestal. I think we're an organization, we're a community that's growing up, and part of the one of the stages they talk about in psychotherapy terms of growing up is the idealization stage. You know, children around that kind of pre-teen stage need to idealize their parents. So you get 7-year-olds saying, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to marry you, mummy, you know. And as Katara said in the chat, you know, Yogi Bhajan never said, I don't know. He was like my father, but always knew. And I adopted that way. And I think that's been a really good way to start growing up. You know, we idealize somebody and we want to be like them and step into their shoes. But then, you know, we're probably now moving into teenager, rebellious, you know, throw all that out, and we don't want anything to do with you old fogies. And hopefully we're going to, you know, keep transitioning as a family together to come into that. Yeah, actually there's some really great bits, and there's some bits that in our world now, in the, you know, in this decade doesn't work anymore. You know, and let's look at what's current. And
Great, thank you.
I kind of feel sad that we've lost so much of what we had in the beginning. When you put that song on, that I Love 3HO song during the break, which is a little bit of a corny song, I admit, but it brought me back to the early days and how idealistic we really all were then. And we lived in ashrams, which was uncomfortable in so many ways, but probably a good group learning experience, because you can't get to, you know, infinite consciousness without group consciousness, Yogi Bhajan told us. And so we grew through that. Yes, I was there to set up a lot of the standards for teachers and teacher training, but I am not happy with what's happening at CARI now either. I'm also not involved in it at all, since I was fired in 2006 when the UI board fired about, I don't know, 30 or 40 people and gave themselves all those salaries. And so, you know, a lot of the people that are there now are not people that the Sri Singh Sahib appointed to the jobs. And as I said, I think some of them are struggling to keep the standard, and some of them have kind of made it too commercial or looking too much at numbers of students and money, et cetera. And it's a tough balance. It's a tough balance to create a program and a standard internationally and not have it become somewhat institutionalized. And yet, you know, that is what he wanted us to do. But I understand also, Aftab, like the way you're explaining how when we were just thrown into living in ashrams, or having to go work for a business, or move to a country you didn't like, or marry someone you didn't want to marry, all those kind of ways that he trained us to overcome our own insecurities, fears, prejudices, et cetera, were invaluable. And that's not something that we necessarily do in teacher training or even as teachers of Kundalini Yoga. So how to bridge those gaps, I don't know. And then in terms of, I did ask the Sri Singh Sahib once, sir, The Man Called the Sri Singh Sahib is a wonderful book, but it only goes up to a certain time in the history of your life. And he said, well, you'll write the next one. And I never really took that as like a part of my mission. Because I guess it was because my husband told me something once, which I really believe. He said, if you asked the Sri Singh Sahib something and you got an answer, that was important. If he told you something that you didn't ask him about, that was super important, because he saw it as something you needed to do to fulfill your destiny. You asking him was, you know, you're thinking of what you need to do in your life at any particular moment. He saw destiny. So part of me felt like, okay, that's got to go on the list. But I was also at the time, you know, doing IKYTA and KRI for a long time, and it wasn't the first thing on my list. I'm actually working with another author, editing with her biography of the Siri Singh Sahib. And we now have Fatha Singh's, which is also very beautiful and available digitally and by his generosity free digitally. So I kind of feel like I'm fulfilling that role by helping my colleague, my friend, write her book. But in any case, I may sound like I'm idealizing Yogi Bhajan. I can't help it. I had experiences with him that were so profound and so amazing that I can't not talk about them that way. Of course, I know he was human, and he admitted many times mistakes that he himself made over the years. He even apologized to me once about my first marriage, which he encouraged, and I could say pushed me into doing, but of course, ultimately it was my choice. And he apologized to me about that when it was over. So it's not that I see him as perfect, but I see so much incredible beauty. I've never seen another being like him, is all I can say. And if that's idealizing him, so be it. So,
You're in love, it sounds like. Are you in love?
I'm in love with the husband he gave me, that's for sure.
Well, you can be in love with your teacher in different ways, different energies.
I totally love my teacher. He once said to me, in between my marriages, when I was feeling kind of low, he said to me, "You're mine and you're divine." I take that as an incredibly high compliment, not as a sexist remark.
Waheguru.
And
So,
Kaur, I really hope that you didn't hear me saying you shouldn't tell your stories, because they're beautiful and, you know, they're touching my heart, and please keep telling your truth.
I didn't hear that from you at all. No, thank you.
I agree with Namka, is that, you know, you need to have the teacher. I don't agree so much with Prakash Kaur that you shouldn't put him on a pedestal. It's okay to have him as a pedestal. He's the teacher, he's the leader, he's the founder, he's everything. I sort of disagree with Namka that KRI is separate. It's not. I mean, all the guys who are in KRI are in the Khalsa Council, and the Khalsa Council is on the board, and the board is intermixed with the EPS, and the EPS is intermixed with the Akal security, all intermixing. So there's a lot of interbreeding going here. So I think the best way forward really is to have everything separate, completely separate. A separate Korean Academy, a separate library of teachings, a separate KRI training, book publication area, a separate Sikh Dharma with exactly individual and independent oversight on each one, completely unrelated. And it could be overseen maybe by the Khalsa Council if they can get the acts together and have young people there to give advice and some guidance. I think otherwise it's going to be corrupt forever. It's not going to get out of the hole. There's so much corruption in the teacher training in the level 1, 2, and 3 hierarchy system that it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get people into spiritual mastery. We're just going to churn people out. They're going to have problems, going to be involved with money and status, and we will just keep on repeating these same mistakes that we've done before. So, in a way, I don't care because I'm not involved. I'm not getting any newsletters from what's happening, but I do care in a way because this is the legacy of my teacher. You know, so in that way, so take it from whatever that means. So. I'd like to say thanks a lot for you, Guru Father, for hosting this these seminars, having us here. And I know our time is almost up, and I appreciate everybody coming out and listening and sharing. Thank you.
Well, you know, that's why I dragged you on board. You have to admit I dragged you. You know, you didn't originally want to join us, but I know that he cherishes his legacy, and he's a part of that legacy. He himself said, you know, he feels that he's a very true student of Yogi Ji. And so we're all a part of that legacy, and we can try and do our own thing and not relate to those crazy people over there. But that organization, God bless her, Namkar that she started, Yogiji gave it the name Ikta. And Punjabi Sikho Ji, study your Punjabi. Ikta means oneness. It does. Every once in a while it's good to know a little Punjabi. Ik onka. Ik means one. And so I do pray and hope that we can stick together. I do, personally, I feel that the youngsters, now they're 40, whatever year old, but the people that are younger than us in this movement, or even the ones that are potentially in this movement, do have some realistic grievances. The Khalsa Council is way too old, and we don't support and we don't nurture and groom, if that's the word, people to move into leadership positions. And of course they're resentful. Of course they're resentful if they're promised work and they're not given it. Of course they're resentful if we give them this beautiful idyllic education in Amritsar and just plop them in the swamp afterwards and don't look after them properly. So I mean, when you have, the first solstice I was at, it was a winter solstice in Florida in 1972, and Yogiji said, "Mark my words." So I don't remember that much. It was cold. I didn't prepare properly. We held up our arms a lot. But the other thing I remember was when he said, "Mark my words," he talked about in defense of Swami Satchidananda, his good friend. And he said, Swami Satchidananda, his secretary, is accusing him of sexual impropriety. And this is how Americans, this is how you Westerners bring down your spiritual teachers. So I made a mental note. And personally, I don't personally think Yogiji's capable of that. I don't think, Gutesh Singh said it well, and he was guard outside Yogiji's bedroom door for many years. He said, I don't think Yogiji woke up in the morning and said, well, who am I going to abuse today? I don't think he was like that at all. That's not the character profile. But I am happy in a sense that some of the what we call young people are using this sexual allegations to get our attention. Because boy, they get our attention, and maybe completely bogus. But we need to pay attention to those generations, more than one generation now, and fostering them and nurturing them and grooming, if that's the word, into leadership positions, because they've been promised a lot. You said our future is golden. We're going to be leaders. We'll be rich, and I think it's a multi-generation project. Much as Yogiji said, Moses, when he could have crossed the Sinai in 40 days. We took 40 years because it was a character building process, taking slaves and building them into leaders. And you're going to lose people for sure, and it's going to be hard for sure. But that's the way I see it, and I'm glad people have been pricked, their eyes have been pricked open, and heaven help us with how this thing goes. I hope that everybody stays in a spirit of unity and of taking great pride in this legacy. And for heaven's sake, as Nam Prakash said, keep Yogiji his dignity, even if you've never met him, or everybody deserves at least that much. So, any final words from anybody? Then we'll sing "Long Time Son." Okay. Interesting. Heart goes out. Beautiful. You can always email me afterwards if anybody has any questions. We'll be sending out the recording, God willing, later in the day. Shall we unmute and sing "Long Time Son"? Come on up, Aftab. We want to hear your beautiful voice. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
All right. May the long time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. May the long time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. Guide your way on. Guide your way on. Satnam.
Thank you, everyone.
Creator. Thank you, Creator, for this webinar. Thank you for these teachings, for this legacy. Thank you all. Thank you for the technology that kept us together. May we live as healthy, happy, and holy by your grace. Satnam.
Very good.